You wake in the manor's guest chamber with a kind of reluctant awareness, not so much a jolt as a slow float upward from the fog of night. The beams above you creak faintly, as though the house itself is yawning alongside you, its joints and timbers weary but solid. The walls are thick, the window narrow and slightly bubbled, and the faintest thread of grey morning seeps in through the glass. You blink against the dimness, adjusting slowly, watching how the angled light collects on the edge of the wooden chest near the bed. The smell is the first thing that settles you fully into place. The rushes strewn on the chamber floor are not fresh, but they have been sprinkled with dried herbs, lavender, mint, a little marjoram. You notice the faint mustiness beneath the herbs, the underlying smell of damp straw that has seen many seasons. It mingles with the fabric smell of wool blankets, with a tang of iron from the nails in the bed frame. It is not unpleasant, just layered, like the house itself, nothing too sharp, nothing too clean. A scent you accept because there is no reason not to. The chamber is simple. A small bed, narrow but serviceable. A wooden stool by the bedside, on which rests a pewter candlestick, its wax stub tilted, hardened into a little frozen spill down the side. You rub your eyes, noting the film of wax still faintly on your fingers from last night, when you had pinched the flame out before sinking beneath the covers. The ceiling beams are thick, darkened by time and soot, and they hover above you like patient guardians, their age carved into their very surfaces. You stretch, slowly, unwilling to disturb the hush that still hangs in the air. Your limbs feel heavy, and the woolen blanket clings as though reluctant to let you go. The mattress beneath you is stuffed with straw, uneven in its weight, softer here, lumpier there, with a faint crinkling sound when you shift. There is comfort in its imperfection. It is a bed that reminds you that sleep is never entirely free of sound or shape, but always a negotiation with what is given. From beyond the door you hear the muted rhythm of the house stirring, a faint shuffle of feet over wooden planks, a distant clang, perhaps pewter on stone, the cough of a servant who has risen far earlier than you. The air carries with it a faint wisp of smoke, drifting in thin lines from the kitchens below, curling through cracks in the boards. The fire is being coaxed awake, and you picture the hearth sputtering reluctantly, then yielding to the persistence of kindling. You turn onto your side and let your gaze linger on the narrow window again. The glass is uneven, bubbled, and the morning light wavers strangely as it passes through, as though the day outside is not quite stable, not quite finished with its shaping. Through the blur, you can see little more than a strip of pale sky, and perhaps the vague silhouette of a tree branch. There is no urgency to confirm what you think you see. The exact detail does not matter, and the uncertainty itself is oddly restful. You run your hand over the blanket, tracing the rough weave of the wool. It catches lightly against your fingertips, reminding you of its presence, reminding you that texture once mattered as much as warmth. You think of how this blanket has likely been folded, shaken, passed between beds for years, and how each night it absorbs a little more of the life around it. It is heavy, reassuring, indifferent to whoever lies beneath. The pillow under your head is stuffed with feathers, though not abundantly. You feel the occasional quill point pressing faintly through the linen cover, a gentle prod against your skin. When you shift, the feathers move with a quiet rustle, adjusting themselves without complaint. You breathe slowly into the pillow, inhaling the faint, dusty softness of aged linen that has been laundered many times in cool well water. Your feet slide toward the edge of the mattress, brushing against the wooden bed frame. The wood is cool, polished smooth by countless sleepers before you. You press your toes against it just to feel the solidity, just to anchor yourself in the morning. You stay like that for a while, suspended between stillness and the inevitability of rising. The chamber does not press you forward. It asks nothing urgent. The space seems to prefer you lingering, taking stock, noticing. You hear another board creak in the hallway beyond, slower this time, as though someone pauses, perhaps balancing a tray or holding a candle. The sound fades, absorbed by the thickness of the manor walls. You sit up gradually, letting the blanket fall back across your lap. gathering folds of wool that seem to sag reluctantly toward the rushes on the floor. Your breath creates a little mist in the cool morning air, barely visible against the dimness. You run your hands over your face, the stubble faintly rough beneath your palms. The basin of water waits by the stool, silver surface unbroken, and you glance at it without yet moving toward it. For now, you simply remain where you are, in a bed that is more straw than softness, in a room that smells of herbs covering damp, in a house that wakes as heavily as its guests. You let your eyes rest on the beam above your head, tracing the uneven cut of the wood, the way it seems both endless and finite, a reminder that the day ahead will unfold at its own pace, whether or not you hurry. You do not hurry. You let yourself stay, as if time is measured only by how long you can listen to the faint breathing of the manor around you. You rise when you are ready, not because anyone calls, but because a thin ribbon of morning asks politely. Your feet find the rushes, cool through the weave of last night's herbs, and you step to the stool where the pewter basin waits. The ewer stands beside it, simple and serviceable, a cool weight in the quiet room. You rest your palm on the empty bowl and feel its patience, a quiet circle waiting to be useful. A faint sweetness of dried lavender lifts from the rushes when you move, thin as a memory. You lift the ewer and tilt. The stream falls steady, a narrow thread that strikes the bowl and widens into rings. The sound is modest, neither splash nor clatter, only a soft note repeated as the basin fills. You stop before the water reaches the rim. There is no virtue in bravery here. Cold makes its point without help. A folded square of linen lies nearby, hems hand-stitched, edges a little frayed from many mornings like this one. You dip it into the water and watch the fabric darken as it drinks. When you lift it, droplets gather, hesitate, then slip back into the bowl. You wait a heartbeat, let the weight fall away, and press the cloth to your face. The cold meets your skin with a clean, uncomplicated argument. You close your eyes and accept the lesson. Wake, but do not hurry. You wipe your cheeks, your eyelids, the bridge of your nose where sleep printed a faint line. You pass the cloth behind your ears where the air keeps secrets, then along the back of your neck where night left its last shadow. The water is honest, clear, cold, plain. When you dip the cloth again, the surface breaks and settles at once. Soap sits in a shallow dish, not white, not perfumed with gardens, but a yellowish cake that remembers lye and tallow. It is the sort that works without ceremony. You rub the cloth across its surface until it glides, then work the lather with your fingers. The bubbles come slowly, a respectful film that minds its place. You clean your hands first, palms and knuckles, the lines where ash and dust like to hide. You draw the cloth over your wrists where veins rest blue beneath the skin. You scrub gently at the crescents where nails meet flesh, then rinse, letting the water carry away the dim cloud of what is no longer needed. Your face follows, small circles, light pressure, a ritual without hurry. A draft noses under the door and cools your damp skin. Beside the basin waits a second cloth, drier and more patient. You take it up and press, not rub, because rubbing makes noise and heat, and neither is invited yet. The linen drinks with quiet gratitude. It leaves your skin cool but not icy, awake but not startled. You fold the cloth as you go, offering new corners to new places. You lean to the bowl and take a palmful of water, passing it over your hairline to smooth the strays that chose their own direction in the night. A droplet travels toward your temple. You let it finish before you lift it away. Another palmful goes to the back of your neck where warmth gathers. You follow with the towel's gentle answer. Beyond the door the house stirs. Here only cloth, water and skin have their quiet say. On the stool's corner rests a tiny vial stoppered with cork. A little rosewater waits there, not a luxury so much as a small courtesy to yourself. You unstopper it and press a single drop onto the pad of your finger. You touch it to each wrist, to the hollow where throat meets chest, and to your sleeve cuff where linen will remember longer than you will. It is a mild scent, the suggestion of a garden far from smoke. You glance back at the soap and let it rest. Today does not require more scrubbing to be respectable. Respect can be quiet, and cleanliness can be measured in simple degrees. You dip the first cloth again and pass it over your hands, then wring it, twisting until water threads itself away. Your fingers redden a little from the cold and look newly made. The basin now holds what you have washed away. A thin swirl of soap, a few feather threads from the towel, a faint mist of breathed-out night. You study it for a moment, a small record of the hour. Then you take the bowl with both hands, mindful of its weight, and the way metal steals warmth, and tip it into the small pail set for that purpose. The water lands with a low sound and is on its way. Someone will empty it later. You thank them in your thoughts. You rinse the basin with a smaller pour from the ewer and set it to rights. The soap returns to its dish. The wet cloth is draped across the stool's rung, the dry cloth folded and laid like a simple crest. Nothing here is urgent, but everything can be tended. You press the cork into the vial to be sure. The ewer, a little lighter, seems pleased to rest again. You sit a moment with your hands open to the room, feeling the air finish its work on your skin. Your fingertips have that clear, tight feeling that comes after water has said what it needed to say. Your face is unadorned except by quiet. The house creaks like a thoughtful old friend. Somewhere, a fire wakes, and a spoon meets the side of a pot with a patient knock. Your shoulders loosen by a finger's width, which is ample. You place your hands on the basin's rim once more, not to use it, only to feel the cool edge. Your breath moves in steady measure. Cold water, plain cloth, steady hands, small means by which the day takes you in hand. You rise, ready not for clamour or splendour, but for the simple discipline of being almost clean and entirely awake. You move back toward the bed and reach for the garments folded neatly on the wooden chest. They have been brushed the evening before, shaken of dust and lint by a servant's hand, though their stiffness is not something brushing could erase. The wool is thick, the linen beneath it coarse, and yet there is a comfort in their scratch. You let your fingers rest on the upper layer, noting the faintly oily smell that wool never loses, no matter how many times it is washed in lye and dried in wind. You lift the shirt first. The linen is cool in your hands, the fabric heavy, its seams worked with thick, uneven stitching. You hold it up in the dim light and notice patches at the elbows, carefully sewn, not new but not careless. You slip it over your head, the fabric falling stiffly around your shoulders. Against your skin it is rough, especially at the neck where the edge rubs. You tug it a little, letting it settle. Linen is honest. It neither flatters nor forgives, but it wears long. Next comes the woolen doublet. Its shape is deliberate, close-fitting, more rigid than the shirt. The sleeves are narrow, the body stiff, and you take your time easing into it. You slide one arm through, then the other, feeling the tug along your shoulders. The laces wait at the front, and you draw them slowly, not to make yourself grand, only to hold the garment together. Each knot is a little ceremony, small, repetitive, without rush. The wool scratches faintly at your wrists, reminding you that clothing once spoke by texture as much as by colour. The hose lie folded beside the doublet. You gather them in your hands, wool again, though thinner, worn from use. They stretch reluctantly as you pull them up, clinging close against your legs. You smooth the wrinkles with your palms, working slowly, as if convincing them to yield. The garters are plain strips, no decoration needed, and you knot them firmly just below the knee. They hold without fuss, biting gently into the cloth. Your shoes wait near the bed's foot. Leather, stiff at the toe, softened at the heel where many steps have left their memory. You lift one and press it to your nose before slipping it on, the smell of tanned hide still clinging, mixed with earth from yesterday's walk. You push your foot inside, feeling the shoe yield slowly, then take the second in the same patient way. You stretch your toes, let the leather remember its shape, then stand to test their weight. Around your waist goes the belt, plain brown, cracked where it has been pulled too many times through the same notch. You fasten it and feel how it draws everything together, not tight but steady. A pouch hangs from it, light and empty for now. You pat it absent-mindedly, not in expectation, just in acknowledgement of its presence. You drape your cloak across your shoulders. It is heavier than the rest, the wool dense, lined with faded linen. The clasp is simple brass, worn smooth. You fasten it at the chest, and the cloak falls about you with a sigh, heavy folds brushing against your calves. It smells faintly of smoke, as all cloaks do, having been worn near hearths and torches more often than not. The mirror in the chamber is no mirror at all, only a small polished disc of metal hung from a nail. You glance at it briefly, the blurred image showing more shadow than face. You smooth your hair with your palm, not because you expect perfection, but because the gesture belongs to the morning. The reflection fades quickly in the dimness, leaving you with only the feel of the fabric against your skin and the weight of wool about your shoulders. You draw a slow breath. The clothing presses in, not gently, but firmly, as though reminding you that a body is meant to be held, contained, dressed with weight. It is less a comfort than an anchor. The garments bind you to the day, to the hours that will follow, to the company you will keep. The room feels smaller now, with you fully clothed, the air heavier, the floorboards more solid beneath your steps. You bend once more to adjust the buckle of your shoe, hearing it creak in answer. Your sleeves shift against your wrists, scratching faintly, not cruelly, just insistently. You stand straighter. The basin of water waits behind you, the towels damp, the soap faintly slick. You leave them where they are, knowing they will be cleared. You glance once at the bed, rumpled and warm, the straw mattress still carrying the memory of your weight. It tempts you for a moment, but only in jest. The day is ready, and the garments you wear do not invite lying down. You reach for the chamber door. The iron latch is cool in your hand, the wood thick, the hinges groaning softly as you pull. Beyond it waits the dim hallway, already stirred by distant footsteps, already alive with faint echoes. The wool itches against your neck as you step forward, but it feels proper now. You are dressed, and the day has claimed you. You step into the hallway, and the house greets you with the hush of its beams. The air here is cooler than in the chamber, touched with faint draughts that sneak through window cracks and along the stone joints. You walk slowly, your boots pressing the boards into low creaks that seem to answer you, as though the manor prefers conversation with each step. Ahead, a thread of smoke scent grows stronger, not sharp but steady, and it mingles with the dry dust of wood. You descend toward the kitchens, guided less by sight than by the gradual thickening of the air. The stair is narrow, its stones worn smooth in the center by many feet, its walls close and unpainted. You let your hand brush along the rough surface, fingers catching lightly on old mortar line. The chill of stone lingers in your skin even after you lift your hand away. The kitchen door yawns open, wide and low. The hearth dominates at once. Logs lie half-charred, their ends glowing, their centers coughing little bursts of flame. Smoke climbs and swirls before it finds the flue, not rushing but drifting lazily as though reluctant to leave. The room is already alive with work. A servant bends over the fire, coaxing embers with an iron poker, tapping until sparks scatter and vanish in the sooty air. Another stirs a pot that hangs from a hook, her wooden spoon scraping slowly against the bottom, a sound like muted tapping on a drum. The smell that rises from the pot is plain porridge grains boiled in milk and water, though faint sweetness hides beneath, perhaps honey added earlier. You stand quietly at the threshold and let your eyes roam. The walls are blackened, their surfaces seasoned with years of cooking smoke. Hooks hang along them, bearing ladles, knives, iron skewers. Copper pots gleam faintly in the firelight, their shine dulled with dents, their handles darkened where hands have held them. A wooden table sits against the far wall, scarred and pale, its surface piled with trenchers cut from yesterday's bread, waiting to be used again. At another hearth, smaller and set aside, a boy kneels with a basket of kindling, arranging sticks with careful slowness, each placed like a puzzle piece. He blows gently at the ember he has coaxed, cheeks puffing, the spark glowing brighter, fading, then brighter again. You hear the faintest whistle of his breath, almost swallowed by the crackle of the logs. The kitchen is never entirely still. A dog shifts in the corner, curled near a pile of rags, lifting its head briefly before sinking back into warmth. A hen clucks softly in a crate, feathers rustling as she rearranges herself. The rhythm of these small movements joins the larger music of the room. Fires pop, spoons scrape, logs sigh, servants cough. You notice a tray of herbs drying on a shelf above the hearth. Their stems are brittle, their colors faded into muted greens and brown. When the fire flares, the warmth wakes their scent. Thyme, sage, maybe rosemary, faint but insistent. It mixes with the wood smoke, giving the air its layered weight. You breathe it in, not deeply, just enough to taste the mingling of plant and ash. The floor beneath you is paved with uneven stone slabs, cool even through your shoes. You feel their firmness each time you shift your weight. Straw has been scattered here, though less for herbs and more for catching spills. It crunches faintly when servants move. One girl crosses with a jug of water, balancing carefully, her steps soft, her gaze lowered. The jug sweats against her apron, droplets sliding and falling into the straw below. You notice how the room feels both busy and slow. Every task has its own rhythm, repeated countless times before, known by heart. Nothing is rushed, yet nothing waits. The fire does not hurry, but it never stops. The spoon circles the pot again and again, scraping, stirring, scraping. The logs collapse inward, shifting, then settling into a new shape. The air thickens, cool drafts from the hall swallowed by heat from the hearths. You stand there long enough to let the sounds and smells imprint themselves. The servants do not mind your presence. They are too deep in their work. You nod once, quietly, though no one looks up. This is not a place of greeting, but of tending. A copper ladle rests on a hook by the fire, its handle black with soot. You touch it with one finger, feeling the metal's warmth, not enough to burn, only enough to remind you that flame has passed here. You withdraw your hand, smelling the faint tang of copper now carried in your skin. The kitchen swells around you with its simple chorus. Wood, smoke, grain, herb. There is no grandeur here, only necessity. Yet it is this place that sustains the feast to come, this place where swans will later be turned and roasted, where sauces will be thickened, where platters will be filled. For now, it is only porridge, only embers, only small hands arranging kindling. You watch once more as a servant stirs the pot. The spoon rises, drips, circles, falls. A movement so ordinary that it calms you to see it. The manor may host great company above, but here below it is rhythm and repetition, heat and grain. You let your eyes linger on the firelight playing across the iron tools, glowing and dimming as the logs breathe. When you turn at last to leave, you carry the scent with you. A mix of wood smoke, herbs, and the patient sweetness of morning porridge. It clings faintly to your cloak, joining the smells of wool and cold stone already there. You step back toward the hallway, your ears still filled with the kitchen's steady music. You step through the doorway and into the stone courtyard, where the air feels fresher, though it still carries the faint trace of smoke from the kitchens. The sky above is pale, not yet bright, a grey-blue that seems undecided about the day. Your boots strike the cobbles with soft echoes, the sound carrying and folding back against the stone walls that encircle the yard. It is not a grand courtyard, but it has weight. Stones uneven from many years, corners softened by moss, shadows clinging where the sun has not yet reached. You walk slowly, letting the space settle around you. The morning cool rests on your cheeks, sharper here than in the wooden hallways. Each breath tastes faintly of damp earth, mingled with the dust of straw. The wind slides lightly between the walls, brushing your cloak so that it shifts against your legs with a muffled swish. Stable boys are already at work. You see one with a broom, its bristles worn to uneven lengths, sweeping in long arcs. Straw scatters, moving in reluctant piles that catch against the stones. Another boy drags a bucket across the yard, the iron handle scraping with a steady metallic whine. He sets it down by the trough, and the water inside trembles with little rings that shimmer briefly before they vanish. A cart rests near the wall, its wheels rimmed with dried mud. The horse that pulled it stamps softly in place, shifting its weight from hoof to hoof. It's breath clouds in the morning air, rising briefly before dissolving. The smell of animal lingers here. Hay, sweat, and the sharper tang of manure. It is not offensive, only honest, the ordinary fragrance of work. Your eyes follow the swallows as they dart above the roofline, quick shadows cutting against the pale sky. Their wings flicker sharply, then vanish behind the gables. They return again, circling, their cries thin and short, like threads pulled taut. The sound feels small in the wide air, but it carries, bouncing gently from wall to wall. By the far corner of the courtyard stands a well. Its wooden frame is darkened by damp, its rope frayed but strong. A servant turns the crank with steady rhythm, each groan of the handle answered by the splash of the bucket rising. The sound is deep, hollow, a reminder of the water hidden below. She pours it into a pail, and the stream glitters briefly before disappearing into the dark container. The cobbles beneath your feet are irregular, some jutting slightly, others dipped into shallow hollows. Rainwater lingers in those dips, thin puddles reflecting the grey of the sky. When you walk past, your boots disturb them, and the ripples chase one another until the surface stills again. The moss at the edges glows faintly green in the muted light, soft against the hard stone. A boy leads a mule through the yard, its hooves striking a heavier note than your own steps. The animal's ears twitch at every sound, turning toward broom, toward bucket, toward bird. Its pace is slow, resigned, the leather strap slack in the boy's hand. The mule pauses at the trough, lowers its head, and drinks noisily, the water sloshing and dripping down its muzzle. You notice how sound builds here. The scrape of broom, the clatter of bucket, the thud of hoof, the swallow's cry. Each is small alone, yet together they weave a steady fabric that fills the courtyard without rushing it. Nothing interrupts, nothing jars. It is a morning soundscape designed not for drama but for continuity. You pass near the wall where tools lean, rakes, forks, wooden poles, their handles smooth with years of grip. A faint smell of hay hangs here from bales stacked under a lean-to roof. The hay spills slightly, its dry strands catching in corners, crunching softly underfoot. A cat sits among them, tail flicking lazily, eyes half closed, watching the courtyard as if nothing here is new. Your cloak stirs again as the breeze shifts. The air is cooler now, brushing lightly at the edge of your face, carrying the sharper scent of damp stone. You breathe it in slowly, letting it travel deep, and release it in the same quiet measure. The courtyard feels less like a place of passage, and more like a pause, a held breath between the hush of chamber and the weight of hall. You linger a little longer, listening. The broom continues its sweep. The well creaks with another turn. The horse stamps again, iron shoe ringing against stone. The sounds are patient, repeating, unremarkable. They layer themselves like the garments you wear, one upon another, until they make a whole. When you move again, it is without urgency. Your steps echo once more across the uneven stones. The courtyard behind you carrying on in its slow work, indifferent to your passing. Ahead waits the door to the great hall, dark oak heavy against its iron hinges, waiting to let you further into the day. You re-enter the wooden hallway where light comes long and thin through narrow glass. Timbers keep up their small-talk modest groans, a sober creak when weight shifts. Your cloak brushes your legs, the wool remembering the courtyard's coolness. The air is warmer than stone and colder than fire, suited to ordinary greetings. Where the corridor widens by a carved post, a rush mat softens footfalls. Its straw edges bend under boot leather. Two guests approach with the faces of people who packed more than they slept. You incline your head. They answer in kind. A small treaty of politeness is signed and filed. A gentleman in a dark doublet steps from a side chamber, fastening a cuff, as if the thread might confess something if tied correctly. You exchange a quiet, "Good morrow." A coin passed hand to hand with no intent to spend. The corridor takes the syllables and tucks them into its joints. A lady glides past with a maid stitched to her hem. She remarks on the weather in a tone suggesting the sky should take notes. You answer in the same key, mild, agreeable, unoriginal. There will be enough to look at without inventing new weather. Farther on, a small table bears dried quince and almonds that never seem to decrease. A knot of younger guests speaks of the coming swan's necks dressed in gilt paper, luck for households with ambitions. A wedding in Kent is mentioned, 2 sons in 2 years offered as evidence. The claim floats like a feather that will land where someone wants it. You nod without promising belief. The window ledge is deep enough to lean upon without pretending otherwise. Your hands rest on the sill. The stone is cool beneath a thin dust. Outside, the courtyard repeats its lesson: broom, bucket, horse, as if it has rehearsed for an audience of glancing guests. You accept the role of casual witness. It requires no lines and pays in quiet. An older man joins you and clears his throat in the established manner of people who intend to say little and will say it politely. The North Road was muddy, he observes. You concur, though you came by dust. Mud and dust are cousins, and it is unkind to favour one too strongly. He adds that the steward keeps a good cellar. You agree on historical grounds, if not personal experience. The steward passes with keys low at his belt so they do not clatter. He moves with the calm of someone who knows where every chair is and has already forgiven you for moving one. He bows, assures the hall will be ready, and continues without promising anything the next breath cannot deliver. The hallway resumes its steady breath behind him. You trail a finger along the dark wainscot. It has absorbed a century of hands and will accept another without complaint. Near the stairhead, a frame leans against the wall, its border of oak leaves half-worked. A girl lifts her needle, lowers it, repeats leaf by leaf, patience by patience. At a bend in the corridor, a narrow table holds sprigs of rosemary and 2 candles that burn themselves out in graceful defeat. The rosemary is brittle, yet when you press a leaf between finger and thumb, the scent rises clean and sharp, insisting it was once alive and plans to be useful in memory. You rub the fragrance into your palms, a quiet shield against the richer breath of the feast. Another pair of guests arrives, city folk by the cut of their boots and the impatience they conceal poorly. They soften as they near you, as travellers do when the last mile is walked and the first cup is near. You exchange the usual questions. How was the journey? Is the host in health? Have you slept? You answer within the range of yes, mostly, and enough. Exact numbers would be unkind at this hour. The harpist drifts from a nearby door, sounding a few notes to test the room's willingness. The strings answer with a thin silver line that trembles pleasantly in the wooden ribs of the house. He lets the chord hang, listens to it spend itself, then smiles at no one in particular. Music has already placed its foot in the doorway and intends to enter later without knocking. From the far stair, 2 boys carry a folded length of linen toward the great hall. The fabric falls against their arms with the weight of clean water now dry. It will dress the long tables until they seem kinder than planks. You step aside to give them the width they need. They pass with the solemn focus children wear when handed an adult task in public. The hallway approves in the language of Beam's one satisfied creak. Someone mentions the rumour that the swans were brought from a broad marsh at the edge of the estate, taken by boat under moonlight to keep their feathers quiet. Someone else lists orange peel, pepper, perhaps a pinch of ginger if fortune permits. The talk turns slowly, like a spit near the fire, but not yet engaged. No one is hungry. Everyone is preparing to be. A bell sounds softly from the hall, 2 notes. Not an order, merely a suggestion that order exists. The corridor responds in that civilized shuffle by which people decide to move without appearing to hurry. You fall into the current at a courteous pace. Cloaks are straightened, cuffs corrected, and expressions arranged into the neutral interest suitable for a long day of eating. Near the door, a niche holds a jug of watered wine for those who prefer to enter the world gently. You pour a little, purely for ceremony, and let it touch your mouth. It tastes of the clean cup more than of the jug, which is exactly the taste required. You set it back, with the handle turned outward for the next person, because manners are mostly the skill of thinking 5 inches beyond your own hand. The door opens on its iron straps with a calm weight, and a ribbon of brighter air slips across the threshold to meet you. Behind you the hallway keeps its secrets, the low greetings, the brief weather, the handful of rosemary, the promise of music folding them into its wood, as if such things were stored for lean seasons. You step forward with the others. Not first, not last, not important, only ready. You step into the great hall, where the first thing to meet you is the sheer length of the tables. They run almost the width of the room, oak planks joined end to end, dark with polish, lighter where knives have bitten. They are bare for now, their surfaces gleaming faintly in the pale light that filters through the high windows. The windows are narrow and set deep into the wall, so the light comes down in angled beams, catching dust that drifts slowly. As though it too is reluctant to hurry, you walk along the nearest table, your hand hovering just above the polished wood, tracing its uneven grain with your eyes. Each plank tells its own story. A knot here, a ripple there, the marks of trees that grew before this house was built. You imagine the sound they must make when struck by goblets, the heavy thud of cups set down, the scrape of trenchers pulled closer, the low rhythm of knives at work. For now, though, they are quiet, holding their breath, waiting to be dressed. At intervals along the table stand pewter cups already set in place. Their surfaces are not bright, but dulled to a steady grey, each one slightly different in size and shape, a collection of near matches rather than perfect twins. You lift one in your hand, testing its weight. It is cool, dense, the kind of vessel that makes you aware of the hand that holds it. You set it down again gently, the ring against the wood, short and low. At the far end of the hall, a raised platform waits, the high table where the host and most honoured guests will sit. Its cloth has already been laid, white linen that falls in even folds down the sides. Candlesticks are placed at intervals, their bases broad and steady, their wax already showing the dents of last night's burning. A few crumbs cling to the edge, reminders that tables forget nothing. Your eyes wander to the benches that flank the tables. They are long, without backs, polished by countless seated guests. You imagine how they will groan faintly under the weight of bodies, how they will creak in unison when people lean to reach for bread or turn to speak to a neighbour. For now, they line the tables in perfect patience, their wooden legs firm on the rushes that cover the stone floor. The rushes are fresh, scattered only yesterday. They smell faintly of hay and herbs, perhaps mint, perhaps lavender that crunch softly underfoot as you walk. Their green edges are still bright, though they will fade quickly under the press of shoes. A servant kneels nearby, spreading another bundle with careful hands, patting it down into corners where the floor still shows. The sound of stalk against stalk is crisp and dry, a sound that will soon be swallowed under voices. Along the walls hang tapestries, their colours muted but still strong enough to catch the eye. Scenes of hunting spread across them, hounds chasing deer, falcons striking at herons, riders leaning forward with spears raised. The animals appear frozen mid-leap, their woven legs forever outstretched. You stand before one and study its detail. The thread of a stag's eye, dark and wide, the curl of a dog's ear, taut with effort. You notice how the figures, meant to be noble, look faintly weary, as though even in tapestry they understand repetition. Above the tapestries, the beams of the roof stretch across, dark with age, heavy with soot. From them hang iron hooks and ropes, used for lanterns, sometimes for banners. They creak lightly when the wind presses at the shutters. A pigeon coos faintly from the far end, its sound swallowed quickly in the height of the rafters. You pause in the centre of the hall and listen. It is not empty, though few people are here. A broom moves slowly in the corner. A boy carries in a stack of trenchers, setting them down with care, each wooden slab clapping against the next. From beyond the doorway comes the faint scrape of harp strings, notes tuning themselves in patient half-melodies. The air carries a blend of smells, smoke, polish, the dry scent of rushes, and, faintly, the promise of roasting meat, not yet here. The hearth at the side of the hall smoulders. It has not been built up yet for the evening, but a few logs glow low, their smoke curling upward into the dark. You step nearer, holding your hands out just above the warmth, not to heat them, but to feel the line where heat fades into chill. The hearth is wide, its stones blackened and cracked from years of use, its iron grate bowed from many fires. Someone has left a pair of bellows leaning against the side, the leather cracked, the wood handles worn smooth. You turn back to the tables, noting again how they fill the space, anchors of the feast to come. They are not laden yet, but they hold the shape of expectation. You imagine the sound of pewter and wood, the rising of voices, the soft drumming of fingers, waiting between courses. You walk slowly past them once more, boots pressing into the rushes, cloak brushing against the benches. At the doorway stands another servant with a bundle of spoons, their bowls rounded, their handles plain. She lays them out along the table, one by one, a soft thud with each. She does not rush. The repetition itself seems to steady her. You watch a moment, then move on, leaving her to her quiet rhythm. The hall feels less like a room and more like a stage, set and waiting, its actors not yet arrived. You let your hand rest briefly on the wood of the nearest table, the grain rising under your fingertips, the polish cool and smooth. The hall is ready to receive, and you, standing in its length, are ready to witness. You let your steps carry you further into the hall until the great blocks of colour along the walls invite your attention again. The tapestries stretch heavy and wide, their threads thick with years, their edges weighted so they hang without curling. They are not new, but they are not yet faded into silence. Their surfaces gleam faintly where candlelight touched them the night before, and in the grey morning light they rest more muted, as if waiting for the brightness of evening to awaken their stories. You pause before one panel in particular. The scene is crowded with figures, huntsmen riding in formation, hounds streaming ahead, horns lifted to mouths though no sound can ever leave them. A stag in the corner turns its head, its eye too round, too human, caught in thread for all time. You trace its outline with your gaze, noting how the weaver used darker brown to shade its flank, lighter beige to raise the muscle, a red thread or two to suggest the effort of the chase. Moving slowly along the wall, you let each panel unfold. Another tapestry shows a hawking party, nobles standing on a rise with birds balanced on their wrists. The falcons, their feathers worked in tiny strokes of thread, appear almost alive, their wings half extended, as though the next gust of air might lift them free. Below, a river curls in blue silk, a fisherman leaning from a bank with a rod too stiff to bend. The fish he seeks is silver thread, glinting in the shifting light. The air near the tapestries smells faintly of wool, of dye, and of the herbs tucked behind them to keep moths away. A trace of rosemary rises when you brush near, sharp and resinous, mixing with the older scent of dust held in woven folds. You breathe it in slowly, the scent that is both protection and age, both necessary and ornamental. You let your fingers hover near the surface of one hanging, close enough to feel the cool draft against it, but not daring to touch. The rule is unspoken yet understood. To touch is to wear away, to fray, to unmake the hours stitched into its weave. So you look instead. You trace in your mind the hunt, the hawk, the fish, the rider, and let them stay in their stillness while you move on. The next wall holds smaller panels, each framed in narrow oak borders. They are more domestic in subject. A lady winding yarn on a wheel, a servant bearing a tray, a boy chasing geese across a yard. Their colours are simpler, their forms less strained. You linger here, finding comfort in the ordinariness. Not every wall must tell of horns and spears. Some may simply remind guests that life, even then, was full of small errands, of children running, of bread carried from oven to hand. Above the high table hangs the most elaborate scene. A great hunting feast under an oak tree, tables spread outdoors, platters overflowing, goblets raised in frozen cheer. Swans appear here, not alive, but displayed proudly with their feathers still intact, their wings spread as if still on water. The weaver captured their long necks in smooth arcs of white silk, the shine of their feathers in layers of pale thread. You study the detail, and recognize in it the echo of what tonight will hold. Swans not only eaten, but displayed as symbols, reminders of fertility and fortune, woven into feast as surely as into tapestry. The hall is not silent. though your eyes are busy. You hear the steady sweep of a broom still working in the corner. A boy coughs once as he sets more trenchers on the table. Outside, a gust presses against the shutters, rattling the iron fastenings for a breath, then letting them rest again. The sounds fold into the background, leaving your focus on thread and colour. As you step back from the wall, you notice how the tapestries soften the space. Without them, the stone would echo too sharply. The air would feel harsher, the hall colder. With them, the sound is gentled, the light muted, the room dressed not just for warmth, but for conversation. They are as much a part of the feast as pewter and bread. You take a slow walk along the length of the hall once more, eyes brushing the details. A falconer's glove stitched in brown, a dog's collar picked out in red, a riverbank dotted with white flowers, a nobleman's cloak draped in green thread, so thick it almost seems to sway. Each detail pulls you closer, then releases you. You let them pass, content to have seen, content not to hold. The high windows above cast thin beams downward, catching dust that floats and spins. The dust settles briefly on the woven threads, then drifts away again. It is a kind of dance, small, unnoticed, but constant. The tapestries endure, holding their silence, holding their colour, holding their place as the hall waits for the day to unfold. You stand a moment longer, then turn back to the tables. The cloth is still being laid, the pewter still waiting. Yet the walls already feast with colour, already offer their banquet of story. It is enough for now. You hear it before you see them, a slim ribbon of sound easing into the hall as modestly as rain against a shutter. The pluck is pearly rather than bright, a courteous note that arrives, bows, and is gone. You follow it without meaning to, letting it lead you toward the side hearth, where the light is easier, and the air remembers the fire. Two harps wait there like well-behaved animals at rest. One stands tall with a neck that curves gently, strings falling in a pale cascade. The other is smaller, meant to be drawn close, its soundbox dark with long handling. Their wood holds a quiet gloss earned by touch rather than polish. The strings mostly gut. A few perhaps of thin wire keep shades of straw and honey. A cloth is folded on a stool. A small tuning key glints on the ledge. The harpists speak in low voices that are more breath than sentence. They have the unruffled manner of people who begin working long before anyone thinks to watch. One leans in, head turned to listen with one ear, and turns a pin a fraction. A test pluck follows, then another, as patient as someone sorting seeds by feel. The other dampens a neighbouring string with one finger, tries two together, and waits for the narrow stillness between them where no wobble lives. You stand at a generous distance, and let the testing become the room's weather. Single notes step out one by one, like feet proving a bridge. The high ones flash and vanish. The middle notes swell, then thin, the way breath fades from glass. The lowest tones travel under your boots and into the benches as if the wood remembers being tree and hums about it when asked. The tall harp keeps a linen drape over its shoulder, a modest shawl for wood that never complains. Now and then the player wipes a string or rests the cloth across her lap. The small harp's foot sits on a folded square so the floor will not remark. These are tiny courtesies, the kind that keep instruments and rooms in a good temper. When the key turns, the pin answers with a dry little whisper. The pitch rises not by a step, but by a thought. Two strings are sounded together. The soft beat between them narrows, then slips away. It feels like smoothing a wrinkle with the flat of a palm. Nearby, a servant carrying a tray slows without intending to, held in place by the tidy promise of order being restored. The hall seems to lean closer. Tapestries soften their colours. The hearth keeps a smaller crackle. Even the pigeon in the rafters spares you a wing. The tall harp tests a scale, a careful ladder built against the wall. It is not a melody, but it refuses to be mere exercise. A pause, a frown, a quick turn of the key, the same scale again, now without complaint. You look at the player's hands and see what patience makes. Fingers land without haste. They lift without showing they have left. The nails are short. The skin at the tips is polished by work. When a string speaks too boldly, a palm hushes it with the gentleness used for waking a child from a nap. You imagine the faint, clean smell that lives in gut strings on damp days, domestic and ordinary, like parchment before ink. A boy brings a stool. The smaller harpist sits and tests the height with a measure of elbow and shoulder, then adjusts by the width of a finger. The harp's body finds the chest and settles with the ease of a returning habit. A few rolled chords follow low, middle, high, each so soft the notes discover one another only after they are sounded. Wood becomes a sort of speech, air becomes a sort of listener. You close your eyes so the ears can keep the whole field. The hall in darkness becomes a shell around the sound. Pluck, listen, adjust. Pluck, listen, accept. Somewhere a bench gives a courteous creak to say that it too is paying attention. Your breathing volunteers to keep time without being asked. The tall harpist slides a strip of leather under a handful of strings, making a pocket of private notes while neighbours are persuaded into line. The softened sounds are close to a whisper, a small conversation the instrument has with itself. The player smiles once at a particularly obedient note. You share the smile at a distance, not needing the joke explained. A draft remembers the courtyard and comes testing through the doorway. It brushes the strings and moves on. The harps answer with a shimmer like breath across glass. Not complaint, just proof that air exists. A hand rests on the strings to still them, then lifts. Another pair is tried, then a third, and the circle widens until all the octaves sit in their proper chairs. You study the shadows the instruments throw on the rushes. The tall harp's silhouette is ribbed like the frame of a small boat. The smaller casts a hill rather than a ridge. Firelight deepens them, then lets them go. It is a slow piece of theatre that asks nothing from you but attendance. Now both seem satisfied. A few soft phrases pass between them, neither tune nor test, only modest curls of sound feeling out the room's size. The phrases taste familiar, like a melody you could name if it were the least bit louder. Later they will join the cup raising and the table-to-table procession. For now, the music shows its passport and waits at the threshold. You open your eyes and find your shoulders have lowered and your jaw is not holding anything. Tuning has done what it always does when granted time, made the space larger without adding a single board. One harpist glances up, sees that the hall has accepted the argument, and lets the last note fall like a feather choosing its landing without fuss. A final check, low against low, high against high, then quiet. The keys disappear into a pouch. A cloth is laid over the smaller harp to keep the draft honest. Hands fold in laps as tools returning to a shelf. The hall resumes its ordinary breath. You step back by the width of a pace, not to leave, only to make room for whatever will come once sound has found its place. You drift closer to the lower end of the hall, where servants have begun to lay out the morning pottage. The scent reaches you before the bowl does. Warm, mild, and steady. The fragrance of oats thickened in milk, faintly sweet with honey, faintly spiced with cinnamon or nutmeg brought from far away. The air above it steams in slow curls, carrying with it a comfort that feels heavier than the smoke of the hearth. You take a seat on one of the benches, the wood smooth under your palm, the grain long polished by generations of hands and garments. A boy sets a trencher in front of you, a round of bread hollowed slightly in the middle, and places upon it a pewter bowl filled with the thick porridge. The bowl itself holds heat well, radiating faint warmth to your fingertips as you steady it. The spoon is plain wood, carved with a handle that has been worn to a softer curve. You dip it in and lift your first mouthful. The porridge clings slowly, heavy but not stubborn, sliding into your mouth with a texture both grainy and creamy. The honey softens the taste, making each bite linger, while the cinnamon hums at the edge of your tongue. You swallow and breathe out, letting the warmth sink deeper, as though the morning itself has moved into your chest. Around you, other guests eat in the same unhurried way. Some sit straight, spoons lifted with careful measure. Others lean slightly over the bowl, letting the steam cloud their faces. Conversation is scarce. The hall is filled more with the sound of spoons tapping against bowls, a rhythm repeated in uneven chorus, steady but not loud. A few voices murmur politely, a word about the road, a remark about the air. nothing that needs answering. Servants move along the tables, carrying fresh bowls and refilling those that have been scraped too clean. Their steps are practiced, their trays balanced as though weight has no meaning. One sets down a small jug of milk beside a guest. Another drizzles a thin line of honey over a bowl with the quietest motion. The gestures are small but generous, like folded notes slipped into the morning. You dip your spoon again and take another mouthful. Slower this time. You taste the grain itself, simple, unadorned beneath the spice, reminding you that food is less about novelty and more about repetition. It is a rhythm you fall into with each bite. Spoon down, lift, taste, swallow. Again, the repetition does not bore you, it steadies you, the way waves might steady a boat. A guest across from you speaks of fertility charms, of how certain spices bring fortune, though he says it in the same flat tone as someone noting the weather. Another nods, neither agreeing nor disputing. The porridge requires no belief to do its work. It fills, it warms, it carries you through the morning. You glance back to your own bowl, seeing the surface gloss in the thin light, and you return again to the spoon. The pewter feels heavier as it empties, the weight shifting as you draw nearer the bottom. You scrape the spoon lightly across the sides, gathering what remains, then lift it for one last taste. The honey is stronger at the end, pooling where it had settled, and the sweetness leaves a soft film on your tongue. You breathe out slowly, pleased by how little the meal asked of you and how much it gave in return. When you set the spoon down, it rests against the bowl with a sound more sigh than clink. The servant who passes nods briefly, gathers the trencher, and moves on. The wooden bench creaks as you lean back, hands resting lightly on your cloak. Your body warmer now than when you sat. The hall hums around you with its simple chorus. The scrape of spoons, the soft murmur of voices, the faint thud of a jug set back on the table. It is not a feast yet, but it is a promise in small scale. Warmth, fullness, repetition. You stay a while longer, letting the rhythm of it settle you as much as the porridge itself. The hall does not empty after the porridge. Instead, it grows steadily more alive, as servants move in measured streams through its doors, bearing the first of the heavy silver platters. You notice them before they are placed. Their surfaces glint faintly in the light from the high windows, their weight obvious in the way shoulders tilt and arms brace. The servants' steps are careful, almost rehearsed, as though each tray has its own pace that must be respected. They carry stacks of trenchers, the thick rounds of yesterday's bread, their crusts darkened, their centers cut to serve as edible plates. The loaves have been sliced with a blunt knife. The edges are jagged, rough, yet dependable. A boy sets down a pile, and the smell of baked wheat lingers briefly in the air, faintly sour where the crust burned, faintly sweet where the crumb remains soft. You imagine them later, absorbing juices, softening under gravies, being discarded into buckets for the poor or for animals, their life as vessels short but sufficient. Beside them come the pewter plates, thin and wide, their edges nicked from years of knives. They clatter as they are stacked on the tables, not harsh but rhythmic, the sort of sound that folds naturally into the hall's breathing. A man lowers a bundle of knives wrapped in cloth, unrolling them with the care of someone handling relics. Their blades are dull in colour but sharp enough in edge. The handles are wood, stained darker by countless palms. He sets them out one by one, each with a soft tap on the oak table. Another pair of servants arrives with flagons. Tall, bellied, made of pewter as well, they shine in uneven patches where hands have polished, leaving other parts dull. You hear the liquid slosh faintly as they are set down, heavy and promising. They will be filled later with wine or ale, but for now they stand like sentinels, waiting. The platters themselves draw your eye the longest. Round, shallow, broad enough to hold several joints of meat at once. They are bright in their wear. You can see scratches where knives have torn across them, places where salt has left tiny scars. They are cleaned, yes, but they carry the ghost of many meals. When the servants stack them near the high table, the metal rings against metal in a slow, heavy song that seems to underline the day's purpose. You notice how the servants move without chatter, their communication wordless. gestures slight and efficient. One nods to another, one hand raises, one tray shifts. The air between them is smooth, as if silence itself were the overseer. Their work feels less like preparation and more like liturgy. Each object placed, each platter set, each knife unrolled, all in deliberate order. The guests notice too, though most do not stare. They glance briefly at the platters, then return to their murmured conversations. The silver and pewter are not new to them, but they mark a shift in time, the moment when the hall begins to turn from mourning to feast. You feel it as well, the subtle rearranging of air, the way expectation slips into place like another bench at the table. From the far end of the hall, you hear the bellows of the hearth as a boy works them, feeding the fire to prepare for the roasts. The sound is faint but steady, a groan, a rush, a crackle. Smoke curls lazily into the rafters, carrying with it the first promise of meat. The platters waiting on the table seem almost to lean toward the hearth, as if aware of what they will soon bear. A servant carrying a tray of goblets passes near you. The goblets are mismatched, some taller, some broader, some dented, others nearly whole. He sets them carefully in rows, their rims catching the grey light. You watch him pause, rearrange one so that its dent does not face outward, then move on. The gesture is small, but it tells you that even in a hall of rough boards and rushes, order has its dignity. The last to arrive are the great carving knives, laid in a wooden case. Their blades are long, wide, and worn. A steward opens the case, inspects them, and closes it again with a nod. They will be brought forward later, but for now, they rest like tools before a play begins. You look once more at the silver platters, their emptiness gleaming in the dimness, and feel the patience in their waiting. They are not decorated, not engraved, but they have their own grandeur in size and shine. They will bear swans, venison, pheasant, and other dishes, but even in their stillness now they mark the hall as a place of plenty. The servants withdraw as quietly as they entered, leaving the tables dressed with the first layer of expectation. The hall hums differently now, the wood and pewter speaking softly of fullness yet to come. You remain seated, watching the light rest on the platters, as though the feast has already begun in its slow and deliberate way. You notice the change first as a thickness to the air, the way a room deepens when someone opens a door to weather. A sweetness arrives that is not honey and not fruit, something rounder, fatter, a perfume that lives halfway between comfort and appetite. It slides in from the service doors in thin, invisible ribbons, threads itself through the cool drafts that haunt the lower edges of the hall, and settles just below the beams like a promise that does not need to speak. The hearth boys have been busy. Somewhere behind the wainscot, down the stairs, past the stone passage that always remembers last winter, spits have begun to turn. You do not have to see them to see them. Iron rods bowed a little under weight, forked supports, a tray below to catch what the meat cannot keep. The turning goes at the rate patience approves, steadier than a heartbeat, slower than a clock, which is to say, exactly right. The smell is layered, the way a good story is layered. First the smoke, a soft grey that has soaked into wood and rushes and the hem of your cloak. Then the fat, waking and beginning to melt, finding its way downward in a calm map. Then the browning, that hush of sugars and salt that tells you the surface is beginning to learn its lesson. A single snap sounds now and then, fat touching flame, no drama, just punctuation. A steward passes near with a towel over his forearm, and the pleased face of someone who knows time is doing most of the work. He does not remark on the scent. That would be like pointing out that the sun has remembered how to be the sun. But you catch the faint lift of his chin, the confirmation of progress. He disappears toward the kitchen, and the air fills the space he leaves with another small wave of warmth. If you were to stand by the kitchen door only for a moment, and not in the way you would find the scene already well arranged, a spit boy cranks and rests, his rhythm more tied than labour. On the far side, a jack turns itself with a slow-minded creak, the gear teeth speaking to one another in wooden syllables. A sprig of rosemary ties a cloth into a brush, and a woman leans in to bathe the meat with its own patience, a spoon at the ready, a ladle when the spoon is too modest. Drippings strike the pan below, like very quiet rain. The scent sharpens by a degree, Pepper has joined the conversation, black, a little stubborn, leaning into the fat. You think you catch orange peel working at the edges, not bright, just enough to widen the breath. If there is clove, it is shy. If there is ginger, it will declare itself later when heat has given it courage. These are not decorations so much as companions for the meat's own voice. You stand where the draught from the lower door meets the stillness of the hall. The two airs meet without argument and make the smell travel. It passes along the benches. It drapes itself across the tapestries. It sets a sleepy flutter into the pigeon high in the rafter. Even the harps seem to taste it, their strings taking on a whisper of kitchen that will not harm them. The room notes the change and becomes, very slightly, more alive. You breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, as if the scent itself were a kind of cordial to be sipped. Your tongue pricks with salt that is not yet on it. Your teeth imagine the tug that will come later. Your stomach wakes politely, not demanding, just raising a hand to say it is in attendance. Around you, other guests pretend not to notice. Their eyes lower, their speech remains measured. No one here is greedy in public. The air is allowed to be greedy on everyone's behalf. From below comes a sound you recognize now that you have been educated by it. The soft rasp of an iron skewer turned in its sockets. The hush of a bellows once. A small command in the language fire understands. A lid lifts from a pot, steam moves out, herby and damp, and then the lid returns to its seat with a cluck that suggests it has always known how to behave. Someone coughs, someone laughs, a door goes open-shut. The hall receives each piece and files it neatly. You imagine the meat itself, not swan, not yet, but something meant to soften the waiter joint with the good sense to take colour early, a bird with skin willing to blister into mild crispness. The surface has turned the colour of late afternoon, the edges have begun to lace. Beneath the skin the fat retreats like snow learning spring. All of this takes place at the speed of ripening fruit. The heat does not hurry. It is not paid by the hour. The tray below has its own life. A bead forms and falls, another follows, then a thin sheet gathers in the corner where the pan is not quite level, because floors are not quite level and never were. From that sheet, a spoon lifts, gliding across the slope, and the rosemary brush returns what the meat has given, as if to say there, keep what is yours, this bit at least. The smell that rises with that gesture finds its way into your coat, and will be loyal to you for the rest of the day. Someone opens a shutter for a brief change of air. The strip of outside that arrives is cool and smells faintly of damp stone and horse. It cups the roasting scent, carries it up, and then lets it fall back into the room in a softer version of itself. The window is closed again, and nothing has been lost. The smell has learnt the way now. It would find you in any case. A pair of pages emerges with empty platters that do not feel empty because they already know what they will hold. They walk the long side of the table to practice the route their hands will take later when fullness makes things more serious. Their footsteps wear a little circle into the rushes, a temporary path for an activity that is older than any road. They go past you, and you catch the ghost of smoke caught in their sleeves. The harps offer 3 modest notes, as if to teach the scent how to move gracefully. The notes wait, then drift up along the wall hangings. The smell follows without haste, the way a branch follows the riverbank. Music does not improve roasting. Roasting does not improve music, but the two agree to be kind to each other. You rest your palms on the table's edge. The oak holds a little of the hall's chill, but it is less than it was. Heat is a social creature. It has started to introduce itself to surfaces that thought they were exempt. The pewter cups do not change their face, but if you were to lift one, you would feel the faintest difference in the metal, as if it has remembered how to be slightly less stern. A servant returns from the kitchen alone, and smiling the very small smile of someone who has seen a good colour arrive on a roast. She carries nothing this time, and that is how you know it matters. Report enough for now. She disappears into a side door. A few guests shift on their benches in the universal language of anticipation disguised as posture. A throat is cleared in the tone of patience. No one admits to hunger. The air admits for them. Another snap from below, a sigh, a soft hiss as a ladle tips. The sweetness in the scent grows and then steps back so the smoke can speak again. The balance is careful but not fussy. You think, this is what readiness smells like when it has no need to announce itself. You let your lungs keep the rhythm slow in, slower out, because there is nothing to be gained by using the air quickly. You stand or you sit, both are the correct answer. The smell remains, steady as a hand at your back, guiding you nowhere in particular. The first roasted meats are turning. You are being turned with them, ever so slightly, from morning into noon. The hall grows quieter for a breath, and then a stir moves along the benches as a pair of servants step through the wide doors. One carries a long tray, the other steadies from behind, and on the tray rests the shape that draws every eye. A swan, whole, white feathers still arranged, neck arched in its natural curve as though it had not left the water but only paused here. The bird has not yet been carved. Its feathers gleam faintly in the pale light, brushed and smoothed so they lie neat and orderly, their tips fanned as if air still moved through them. The head is tilted slightly, beak shut, eyes long gone but replaced with tiny dark beads to keep the illusion alive. The body has been roasted, yet dressed again in its own plumage, the cooked skin hidden beneath the familiar coat. It is not meant to look dead, but to look enduring, caught between life and meal, display and consumption. The tray itself is lined with sprigs of green, bay leaves and parsley, the herbs still wet from washing. Oranges, sliced in halves, rest at the edges, their colour bright against the swan's whiteness. Thin slices of ginger root lie scattered too, curling and pale, giving a sharp perfume that mixes with the sweetness of roasted fat. The air around the tray is thicker than before, both herbal and greasy, warm and cold, feast and pond. The servants walk slowly, careful of their steps, their arms straining a little beneath the weight. Each movement makes the swan shift just enough that its feathers catch the light differently, glinting faintly, making it seem as though it had just shaken its body dry after a swim. The hall watches, not with hunger, but with the sort of curiosity reserved for spectacle, for the part of a feast that is less about eating and more about showing. They set the tray down near the high table. The oak beneath creaks faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the rushes underfoot. For a moment the bird simply rests there, neck extended, wings folded in, a centerpiece not yet claimed. Its beak points toward the guests, as though the bird itself were observing them in turn, judging their worthiness to partake. Around you whispers begin, low and steady. A woman leans closer to her neighbour, speaking of how swans are symbols of fidelity, how they mate for life. Another replies that here the bird is for more practical symbolism. Fertility, abundance, the promise of heirs. Someone across the table wonders whether the feathers themselves hold luck if kept under pillows. The voices do not rise, they murmur, weaving their theories like threads into the tapestry of the hall. You notice how the feathers smell faintly of smoke, though they were not roasted. The air has carried its scent to them anyway, layering the perfume of ash upon the clean musk of down. The herbs beneath release their sharpness with the warmth of the bird above, and the oranges bleed their tang into the space. You breathe it all together, a mingled bouquet that tells of pond, kitchen, and orchard in one breath. The servants step back now, hands empty, faces still composed, though their sleeves are dark with grease. They leave the swan untouched, for it is not yet time. The hall continues to hum around it. Guests glance and look away, pretending disinterest, then glance again. The bird draws the eye without effort, its whiteness sharper in the dim hall, its curve graceful against the straight lines of table and bench. You keep your gaze on it longer than most, letting the sight settle. The feathers are not uniform, some are frayed, some bent, a few missing at the wing's edge. They tell you this is no myth, no painted bird. It is real, it was alive, it swam and stretched and preened before being placed here, and now it carries all that history into this feast. You do not feel pity nor pride, only the weight of what it means to make food into symbol. The hall accepts the bird quietly. No cheer rises, no clapping of hands, only the subtle adjustment of posture, the shifting of shoulders, the clearing of throats. The swan is not for delight, but for meaning, and meaning rarely shouts. It sits on its tray, neck arched, herbs and oranges at its sides, a calm reminder of what this day intends to be. The swan rests still at the head of the hall, its long neck curving gently, its bead-dark eyes gazing into nothing. Around it, talk begins to weave in low tones, not quite gossip, not quite learning, simply the kind of murmur that attaches itself to symbols. You hear it in fragments, drifting like threads through the benches. One man leans close to his neighbour and mutters that to eat swan is to draw good fortune into the house, that its flesh brings not just satiety but seed, heirs, continuation. Another woman responds softly, almost bored, that she has heard the same of goose and even hare, but that swan has the greater weight because of its singular grace. Someone further down adds that queens once favoured it, believing the long neck carried prayers more easily to heaven. The statement lingers, not challenged, not confirmed, just allowed to sit among the rest. You listen without leaning, without seeking to join. The words move past you like leaves caught in a mild stream. A boy across the table repeats what he has heard from his aunt, that feathers kept beneath a bride's bed will call children into the house. He says it with the earnestness of someone too young to measure myth against reality. His elders nod, as though it costs nothing to let him believe. The hall breathes more slowly now, the talk hushed, the air thicker with the bird's presence. The scent of roasted fat still lingers, but over it now rides the sharper tang of citrus and the ghost of the pond, suggested by the feathers. Fertility is spoken of often, but no one says the word with force. It is an echo that repeats itself gently, carried by the hall rather than any single mouth. You notice how the guests' eyes shift. Some look at the bird with expectation, others with indifference. A few glance away deliberately, as though acknowledging its power without needing to gaze upon it. A woman smooths her gown in her lap, her hands moving with quiet insistence. A man fingers the rim of his goblet, his thumb circling the metal as though sketching something invisible. Symbols weigh differently on different shoulders. The swan itself remains indifferent, its feathers neat, its beak closed, its wings folded. The tray of herbs beneath begins to wilt under the heat, bay leaves curling, parsley sagging, orange halves softening and releasing their oil. The smell grows richer for it, sharper at the edges, more insistent in the nose. You breathe it, not deeply, only steadily, letting it remind you that symbols too are perishable. The talk of fertility charms grows quieter, softer still, as if guests remember that to speak too loudly might anger whatever spirit listens. The murmurs blur into the hall's natural hush, merging with the crackle of the hearth, the sigh of benches adjusting beneath shifting weight, the faint hum of harp strings tuned earlier. The swan watches over it all, or seems to. You rest your hands on the table, feeling the grain beneath your palms, the steady oak that has held more feasts than any one life could count. The hall leans into its meaning. Tonight, children may be conceived, fortunes may be sealed, lineages may be secured, but here and now, it is only murmurs, only glances, only the patient waiting for the knife. The bird stays whole, untouched, and the room stays balanced between myth and meal. You draw a trencher closer, the round of yesterday's bread that has been asked to play plate, napkin, and final course, all in one humble career. It is solid at the rim, softer toward the middle where heat and air met and then parted. Its scent is quiet, a little sour from the ferment, a little sweet where the crumb still remembers the oven. You touch the surface with a finger, and it gives the smallest sigh, as if agreeing to be useful again. A servant sets down a shallow bowl not far from your hand. The sauce within is dark as late afternoon and just as patient. Steam rises in thin threads. You lean nearer, and the first message is clove warm, shadowed, not loud, the sort of spice that refuses to perform tricks. Beneath it there is pepper with its small, steady insistence, and somewhere under both a tang that hints at vinegar or verjuice, the kind of sharpness that keeps company from falling asleep at table. A dusting of cinnamon lingers at the rim like a polite guest who knows when to stand back. The bread waits. You tear a strip from the trencher's inner ring and hold it up, studying the rough edge, the open pores, eager for news. You dip it slowly, because haste drops things, and also because the sauce deserves to tell its story one line at a time. The crust goes first, learning the heat. Then the open crumb follows, drinking as if it has been travelling. When you lift it, the sauce clings in a modest gloss, heavy enough to be present, light enough to move when asked. You taste. The clove arrives like a low bell rounded, certain, followed by the pepper's little tap at the back of the tongue. The sour edge cuts a narrow path through the richness, and for a moment the bread seems younger than it was a breath ago. You chew, slow and even, letting the crumb press the sauce into every corner of itself. The hall fades to soft edges around the mouthful. Voices gentled, benches distant, candlelight turned to a haze you need not solve. Another piece, another dip. You tilt your wrist a fraction so the sauce finds new territory. This time you notice the base beneath the spices. Bread and wine work together perhaps, or ground almonds lending their quiet body, or both. The cook has thickened the liquid with something that forgets itself well, a substance present only by the absence of thinness. The sauce has no wish to be praised. It merely wants to keep company with bread and later with meat, the way a steady friend keeps pace without mentioning pace. Around you, the same ritual repeats in mild variations. To your left, a guest uses the edge of a spoon to pour a line of sauce across his trencher, as though marking out a boundary. Across from you, a woman dips smaller pieces but holds them longer, watching the surface for the point where the shine turns to a soft dark. Farther down, a boy lifts his bread too quickly, and a drop is lost to the rushes, where it becomes a secret between floor and feast. No one scolds, the rushes have seen worse. You tear again, choosing the portion where crumb meets crust, because it carries both strength and thirst. The bread loosens under your fingers in the familiar way bread does when it is asked to work. You dip and hold. The clove breathes again. You sense a ghost of orange peel this time, not bursting, only walking by and nodding in citrus politeness. The pepper steps forward, then back. The sour note keeps everything from falling into sleep. Across the hall, the white-feathered swan still presides, all curve and intention, but the bowl before you matters more just now. Symbols are well and good. Supper is better taken by the spoonful. You let your eyes lower and attend to the close work of eating, the tear, the dip, the lift, the taste. Nothing here needs a flourish. The sauce answers to simple verbs. A servant passes with another bowl lighter in colour, almost tawny with a scent of ground mustard and a whisper of vinegar. You accept it with a small nod and set it beside the darker one, a pair of neighbours who agree on most things but not all. You try the new sauce sparingly, dipping the edge of your bread as if asking its name. It answers promptly, bright, a little sharp, wheat and heat meeting in a brief handshake. Useful later for capon or ham, you think. The darker one will ask for swan, where spices and fruit can keep the company of deeper flesh. You return to the first bowl and let the bread sink a heartbeat longer. The gloss thickens, then steadies. When you lift it, a thin line trails, and then rejoins what it prefers. You bite where sauce has gathered most. The clove and pepper hold you steady. The vinegar thread keeps you walking. Your jaw moves in the slow cadence the feast enjoys. No hurry, no long pause, a chew that gives the cook time to be understood. Someone at your elbow mentions camline wine, cinnamon, ginger, a fair amount of bread, and wonders if this is such a sauce. You answer that it is very likely cousins with caneline at least, and perhaps closer, though you do not drop names you cannot sign for. The guest smiles, relieved to have a label to set upon pleasure. The label will not change the taste. It never does. Another strip of trencher. The bread near the outer rim is drier and more willing to keep its shape. It slips into the bowl and comes out carrying a respectful measure. You set it on your tongue and press it lightly against the roof of your mouth to feel the crumb surrender its holdings. The flavour opens as simply as a door, clove first, then the others as they choose. Your breath moves in and out through your nose, drawing the warmth higher. You take a sip of watered wine and note how it clears a path for the next mouthful without arguing with the last. You glance down the table. The bowls travel in short circuits, handed from guest to guest with the economy of people who have done this often. A hand turns a bowl so its clean side faces outward, as if courtesy included arranging shadows. A spoon rests between passes, its bowl glossy, its handle stained a tone darker where fingers have held. The oak of the table gleams where sauce has brushed it and been caught at once by a cloth. The steward's eye misses little. You work toward the trencher's centre, where the bread is softer, the crumb more open. Pieces here drink deeply, and you learn to lift them with care, supporting them with thumb and forefinger until they reach your mouth. A small private satisfaction comes from saving a piece that wished to fall apart and letting it keep its promise of being eaten. The sauce rewards loyalty with steadiness rather than fireworks. You pause and sit back an inch, feeling the weight of the food warm in your middle. The room has grown a degree kinder. Candles breathe with quiet flames. The harps rest their hands. The swan waits, still ceremonious. You return to your bread, because repetition is not a weakness here. It is a method. Another strip, another dip. The bowl's surface shivers, accepts, then smooths. By the time you reach the trencher's edge again, your fingers shine slightly, and the faint perfume of clove follows your hands like a small, well-behaved dog. You rub thumb against forefinger and feel the trace of fat, a reminder that flavor travels not only by tongue but by touch. You wipe your fingers on the bread's drier outer rim, the most practical napkin, and finish the small piece you have made cleaner by using. You set the remaining trencher aside to serve its next duty later, when gravies will look for a home. The bowl before you keep steaming, as if unaware of having done so much already. You thank it in the manner sauce prefers. You do not speak. You simply leave it a little lighter. A servant approaches with a flagon, its pewter sides dulled by many hands but polished enough to hold a little gleam in the light. He pours into your cup without asking, the stream steady, the liquid warm enough that a faint curl of steam rises. The scent greets you before the rim does. Mulled red wine, spiced, softened by heat, given patience on the fire until it forgot its sharper edges. You lift the goblet, feeling its weight shift toward your palm. The metal has already absorbed the wine's warmth. It presses into your hand with quiet insistence. You tilt it slightly, watching the surface move in lazy ripples, thicker than water, slower to settle. A note of nutmeg drifts upward, deep and round, followed by cinnamon, then the smaller, sharper tap of clove. Beneath the spices waits the fruit itself, the grape, richer now for having been persuaded to simmer. You take a slow sip. The heat moves across your tongue like a blanket being drawn up from your chest to your throat. The first taste is sweet, honey perhaps, though not enough to smother the rest. The nutmeg lingers at the roof of your mouth, a faint prickle that refuses to hurry. The wine itself has mellowed. It is less a drink and more a soft flame, one that burns not to scorch but to warm. You swallow and feel it descend, leaving a trail that steadies your stomach, as if reminding it to be calm. Around you, others raise their goblets in the same unhurried rhythm. A woman across the table takes her first sip, eyes lowering as though listening to the drink rather than tasting it. A man beside her holds the cup between both hands, breathing in the steam before he drinks, allowing scent to soften him before flavor arrives. The hall fills with the quietest chorus, the sound of liquid being tasted, not slurped, not swallowed in haste, but tested like words one wishes to keep. The servants pass again with fresh flagons. Some goblets are refilled, though not yet empty. Generosity is a kind of rhythm here, repeated whether or not it is needed. You nod as yours is topped once more, the stream catching the light as it falls, the smell rising stronger now that the surface has been stirred. You take another sip, slower this time. The clove hums faintly along the edge of your tongue, while the cinnamon builds in the background, steady and warm. Nutmeg lingers, unhurried. You close your eyes for a moment and let the flavors speak in their own sequence. Spice, fruit, heat, sweetness, then the long, low sigh of aftertaste. The hall grows gentler as the cups empty and refill again. Conversations loosen slightly, words finding softer edges, laughter emerging in brief spurts, then fading back into calm. The harps offer a quiet chord, only a handful of notes, but they seem to blend with the wine itself, as though taste and sound share one bowl. You rest your goblet on the table, fingers circling its rim. The metal is warm still, the wine's perfume rising faintly into the air between you and the swan. You breathe it in, steady and slow. It is not only drink, but atmosphere. Not only flavor, but reminder. The feast is not yet in its fullness, but it is already shaping the room's pace. You lift the goblet once more, and with each sip you feel the warmth sink deeper, pooling not in haste, but in layers. By the time you set it down again, the hall itself seems to breathe with you, steady, warm, and unhurried. The goblets are still warm in hand when the next diversion enters. At first you hear the faintest shuffle beyond the door, a scuff of leather, a muffled cough. Then the hall gives way as a pair of jugglers step inside. They wear patched jerkins of too many colours, their hose uneven, their caps drooping with little bells that do not quite agree with one another. Behind them follow two mummers with painted faces, white powder brushed unevenly, cheeks red as apples, lips blackened in crooked smiles. The guests turn toward them, not quickly, not hungrily, but with the sort of patience reserved for things one already expects at a feast. The jugglers bow low, their bells rattling like a lazy wind in iron chains, then stand and begin their work. From leather pouches they draw balls, 3 each, rough and worn, one patched with cloth, one dark with grease, one faintly damp from some earlier mishap. They toss them in slow arcs, high enough that everyone sees, but not so high as to suggest effort. The balls move like obedient birds, rising, falling, circling, returning always to the hand that released them. The mummers clap with exaggerated hands, their painted mouths frozen in smiles that mock their own applause. One bends at the waist until his face nearly touches the rushes, then springs upright again, sending a gust of powder into the air. The other lifts a wooden mask, painted with wide, staring eyes, and holds it to his face, peering left and right with slow, deliberate menace that convinces no one but entertains all. A juggler drops a ball on purpose. It bounces once on the oak table, then tumbles into a goblet, sending a splash across the trencher below. Guests laugh, not loud, not roaring, but soft and steady, like the creak of many benches at once. The man bows again, retrieves the ball with exaggerated shame, wipes it on his sleeve, and returns to the rhythm. The balls rise and fall again as though nothing had ever gone wrong, which of course was the point. The mummers now act out a short exchange, no words, only gestures. One clasps his hands as though pleading, the other crosses his arms with exaggerated sternness. They circle one another, faces painted in fixed expressions, until the first pulls a length of sausage from his sleeve and presents it like a peace offering. The hall chuckles again, the joke thin but sufficient. The sausage is bitten in half with a flourish, though not eaten, and returned to the sleeve as though it had never existed. The harps offer a faint accompaniment, not a tune, but scattered plucks that underline the rhythm of juggling. The sound fills the hall like drops of water in a basin, plunk, 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 each one marking the fall of a ball, each one erasing the silence that might otherwise press too heavily. Children at the far benches lean forward, eyes wide, mouths open, their small hands clapping out of time. Older guests smile faintly, some with indulgence, some with the sort of weariness that admits the jest has been seen before. But no one looks away. The performance is too light to demand and too easy to refuse. The jugglers shift to knives now, short-bladed, handles worn smooth, not sharpened to danger but gleaming enough to hold the firelight. They rise and fall more slowly, the air hissing faintly as the blades turn. A gasp escapes from one corner of the hall, quickly followed by laughter when a knife is caught neatly. Blade down, handle sure. The rhythm continues. Toss, spin, catch, step. It is less spectacle than repetition, but repetition has its own comfort. The mummers, not to be outdone, stage a mock quarrel. They slap each other with cloth caps, fall backward onto the rushes, roll, groan, rise again. Their powder smears, their painted smiles crack into something stranger, yet still the hall chuckles softly. A child laughs louder than the rest, then hides his face in his mother's sleeve, as though joy itself required apology. At last the jugglers let the knives fall back into their pouches. The mummers bow low, their gestures absurdly grand, their faces still painted in crooked cheer. A small scatter of coins clinks into one pouch, tossed by a steward from the high table. The performers retreat without hurry, their bells chiming faintly as the door swallows them again. The hall exhales. Conversation resumes, quieter, slower, as though the air has been stirred, and now settles back into its layers of spice, smoke, and warmth. The juggler's rhythm lingers faintly in your mind, the slow fall and rise, the reassurance that even mistakes can become part of the act if dropped with enough grace. You sip again from your cup, the mulled wine now cooler, its nutmeg softer, its clove less insistent. The hall feels calm again, its pulse even. The swan still waits on its platter, feathers unruffled, while the guests return to the slow business of bread, sauce, and talk. The moment of diversion has passed, leaving behind only a gentle hum, the echo of bells and painted faces. The hall has settled into that late morning patience when appetites are clear and tempers tidy. Shoulders loosen along the benches, the harps test a few polite notes. The steward nods to the carver, and attention gathers like light on pewter. The carver stands where the window favours him, sleeves turned once, long knife laid briefly along the bird as a greeting. The swan lies as it has lain, neck arched, feathers a calm white hill above what is now a roast. A boy lifts away the herb wreath and oranges and steps aside. You watch the first stroke, no flourish. The blade leans, then glides, finding the seam between skin and darker meat. The hidden skin gives with a small sigh. A spoon follows to steady and to gather the gloss that rises. Pepper announces itself from the steam in a warm, forward voice. Orange peel follows, not speaking but widening the air. A shy thread of ginger keeps to the margin. The carver lifts a slice, lays it on a waiting platter. The meat is darker than goose, paler than venison. It holds together and agrees with the knife. A servant carries the first platter down the table. Hands compose themselves as if surprised by bounty they have expected all morning. The platter pauses by you. You accept a modest portion, because that is how fortune is persuaded to stay. The slice rests on your trencher beside the rim of bread and the dark sauce. You tip the trencher so a little sauce finds its way beneath the meat. Heat softens what the bread held firm and perfumes the air above your hands. You cut a small piece, no heroics, and offer it to yourself. The bite presents its list in a steady hand. Pepper staking a small frontier. Orange a quiet brightness along the sides of the mouth. Meat dense without stubbornness. Part riverbank, part hearth. Where skin remains, it gives a mild crispness that yields to patience. You chew without hurry. The meat asks for that. You try another bite without sauce to measure the kitchen's confidence. The flavour stands on its own feet, some iron, some smoke, pepper stitched in rather than thrown like a cloak. You decide the sauce is a partner, not a rescue, and invite it back. You cut toward the joint where a little fat lingers. Here the meat turns almost silky and remembers the rosemary brush. The pepper grows friendlier. The orange brightens once, then bows out. You use your fingers because sauce always understands fingers. The trencher, faithful, collects what might have escaped and offers it back. A second platter arrives with preserved orange. The slices glow like embers. You press one lightly to wake the oils and let it share a bite. No fireworks, just a wider room. Fresh steam rises from the cut surfaces and folds itself into the hall's older smoke, the two scents shaking hands as equals. When the knife meets cartilage, it dodges without complaint. When it meets bone, it pauses, considers, and chooses another path. The sound is a hush rather than a scrape, as if the blade knows manners. Your sauce keeps a modest sheen. The bread earns its keep, serving as plate, napkin, and, when necessary, secretary for spills. You pinch a corner drier than the rest, and tidy the rim of the slice with a small, deliberate swipe. Etiquette is mostly the art of making little rescues look like design. You take a measured sip of mulled wine. Nutmeg steps forward, Bose departs. Clove leaves a low hum. The fruit returns you gently to the place where pepper begins again. The goblet warms your hand. Agreeable company. A servant refills by habit more than request. The stream falls in a thin ribbon that never splashes, as if noise might bruise the surface. You approve of this superstition. Conversation rises by a stitch, then smooths. Someone recalls an aunt who saved a swan feather and later counted 6 children. Another tells of twins that followed a wedding bird. The tale serves the wine better than the truth. You let the talk pass while you test darker and lighter sauces. The meat chooses both. You look up to the carver. He has found his pace: cut, lift, lay, wipe, begin again. When fat gathers, he chases it onto the spoon and returns it to the slices. When sinew asks for a different angle, he makes it and says nothing. The steward's keys rest quiet at his belt. Even they understand the hour. You finish your first portion and allow restraint a brief rest. A second modest slice finds your trencher. The mustard-coloured sauce answers with a brighter stride. You let it have its moment, then guide the meat back to the darker companion that carries clove and memory. The hall has warmed a degree. Candles behave as if included in a confidence. The harps offer a courteous strain that keeps to the walls and leaves the centre to knives and spoons. You eat as if this were a summer river, and you had decided to wade only to the knee. You pause to notice smaller things because smaller things reward attention. The pewter at your elbow is merely cool now. The trencher's outer ring keeps its backbone, while the middle continues to drink as if it had been promised this task since yesterday. When you lift a soaked morsel, a bead forms at its corner, hesitates, changes its mind, and sinks back into the crumb, an example of good behavior you are willing to follow. Symbols do their work best when nobody stares. You leave the feathered display to its ceremony and attend the slice before you. Your last bite is a pact of skin, fat, and muscle. You dress it with a ribbon of sauce, invite a flake of preserved orange, and give the moment its due. The chew is slow. Flavors take turns. The aftertaste lingers just long enough to see itself to the door. You set down your knife, wipe your fingers on the trencher's dry edge, and lift watered wine to clear the path for whatever the table decides to say next. At the far end, the carver wipes his blade on folded linen and resumes as though time itself had set the tempo. Slices settle, sauces pass, bread does its duty. You have eaten enough to admit it, and not so much that you must defend it. The swan continues its quiet passage like a moon across a small sky. You think of ponds without wind and boats that forget to creak. The hall keeps breathing. The feast steps forward by the width of a slice and stops there, content for the moment with pepper, orange, and patience. You notice how attention drifts toward the swan's head as the platters travel farther down the tables. Some guests glance at the long neck, others gesture subtly, pointing with a finger still wrapped around a knife. It is not the meat alone that carries meaning, but the shape, the curve, the beak signs, read like scripture by those who prefer omens to spices. A man across the hall touches 2 fingers to his temple, then points at the bird's beak, murmuring something to the woman beside him. She nods gravely, as though the gesture itself is worth repeating later. The beak, long and firm, is said to mark strength, vitality, the power to pass on one's name. Another guest whispers that those who eat a slice cut nearest the beak will be granted children strong of voice. You listen, not believing, not disbelieving, only letting the talk move past you like candle smoke. Closer by, a woman lifts her goblet and speaks softly of the neck. "It stretches to heaven," she says, her tone flat and calm, as though she were describing the weather. What stretches is fertile, what bends carries life. The man beside her does not answer, but he nods as if the sentence were sufficient in itself. Another at the table mutters that long necks also mean long fortune, that the house which feasts on swan will never lack heirs. The murmurs overlap, quiet but insistent, threads weaving into one cloth. You rest your hands on the trencher, your portion already eaten, your fingers faintly stained with sauce. You hear the same stories repeated in slightly different shapes down the table. One guest recalls his uncle placing a swan's feather under a pillow and finding his wife with child within the year. Another recalls hearing that the curved neck, when carved carefully and boiled, might strengthen men. No one argues. The talk is not meant to be tested. It is meant to be passed on. The bird itself sits in stillness, its neck proud, its head tilted in the semblance of grace. The roasted flesh beneath the feathers no longer moves, yet the symbol remains alive for those who wish it. A few guests glance away, unwilling to meet the bird's gaze for too long, as though the charm might be too direct if returned. You watch the steward approach, carrying a narrow dish with the swan's head placed upon it. The feathers around the skull remain, the beak shining faintly as though polished. He sets it upon the high table where it may be seen but not touched. A murmur passes again, softer this time, a reverent hum. Some cross themselves, others only lower their eyes. The harps give a single chord, low and resonant, filling the hall for a moment. The note lingers, as if acknowledging that meaning has arrived, even if it is carried by nothing more than a bird's beak and a long neck. You breathe slowly, letting the weight of talk pass over you. The swan is meat, and yet it is more than meat. It is a body, a story, a promise, a superstition. The hall carries it all without effort, as though it were natural that one creature should hold so many tasks at once. You sip again from your cup. The wine cooler now. The spice is quieter. The warmth in your chest holds steady. The swan watches the hall with its bead-dark eyes, and the hall watches back in murmurs, nods, and lowered lids. Fertility has been spoken into the air, and now the air itself seems heavier, laden with hopes no one dares say aloud too clearly. The hall learns how to laugh the way a pond learns to ripple, slow at first, then easy, then as if it had always known. It begins at the high board with a soft burst, like a cushion, giving up air, and travels down the benches in polite waves. You listen rather than join, measuring how the sound finds homes, under tables, in rafters where smoke rests, inside the folds of linen that drape the head table. It settles things instead of stirring them. A gentleman repeats a stable-yard story much repaired by telling. A horse disliked a plank bridge and chose the river, tipping its rider into rushes to save argument. The river grows colder in memory, the rider grows drier, the table pays in modest chuckles. A lady answers with a small truth about a hen that sleeps on a pewter dish because metal keeps warmth. The laugh that follows means yes, we have seen such hens. The harps place brief notes between remarks 3 up, 2 down, stitching humour to wood. A guest attempts a mummer's crooked grin and fails in the approved manner. Benches speak when people laugh. They give long, low creaks, the timber of boats that will never leave the mooring. Pewter taps oak in tidy applause. A spoon slips, recovers, shines. A flagon sets down with a shy thud. None of it is loud. A child down the board tries a pun with the pieces in the wrong order. He grins at the space where the end should be, and the hall supplies it kindly. Your neighbour demonstrates how to hold a goblet by the stem so the hand does not heat the wine. He warms the table instead by setting the cup too near a candle. The flame noses the rim. He withdraws it with dignity. Laughter arrives like a small, well-trained hound. You lift your own cup in a silent salute to good recoveries. Servitors pass with bowls of stewed fruit. Laughter softens to let them through and resumes behind them, like water closing over an oar. Quince and apple sink in their syrup. Cinnamon breathes. Someone observes that apples keep their shape better in stories than in pans. Someone else says quince behaves like a stubborn aunt until persuaded. Talk swells and thins without boiling. A man misquotes a proverb about harvest and marriage. His wife corrects him with half a smile and leaves him the better line. Laughter rests on them like a shawl and moves on. 2 guests compare roads and shoes. each insisting on mud heavier than the other until the benches complain. The room approves that lie and keeps it. What you hear most clearly is the rhythm. Phrase, murmur, laugh. Phrase, murmur, nod. The day is long, the feast longer. Bright wit would be a lantern waved at noon. The laughter here is domesticated, fed often, discouraged from chasing livestock, taught to return when called. It fills the gaps the way rushes fill the floor, whispering but forgiving. A harpist leans on a chord that sounds like a smile. A page misjudges an elbow and rescues a flagon at the last inch. The spill that does not happen earns a larger laugh than any spill could. Someone starts a toast and loses the middle. The room provides it from memory. The talker bows as if the omission were the plan, and finishes to a soft cheer. The harps give an arpeggio that climbs a tapestry like ivy and stops beneath the rafters. You take a spoon of fruit and find that laughter improves it. The quince tastes of yesterday's orchard and today's fire. You set the spoon down with the gravity owed to simple things done properly. Another laugh comes from a different corner, trimmed by distance, and you accept it as if it were yours. Between waves you listen for the instruments beneath. A held breath let go, the scrape of a bench foot finding a hollow, the delicate click of a ring against pewter. Laughter rides these sounds like a feather on air. A guest describes a swan he saw last spring, the way a neck drew a white path across evening water, as if the bird at table might enjoy hearing about itself. The description stumbles but refuses to fall. The whole lends it a hand by smiling. Your wine has cooled to a friendly warmth. You hold the goblet by the bowl because temperature has surrendered and comfort has the watch. Nutmeg is now a rumour, cinnamon a suggestion. Laughter thickens the air by a finger's breadth, then thins again like cream stirred once into broth. At the far end, the carver gives his blade a few neat strokes against steel. For no reason the room sends him a small breeze of amusement. He accepts it as a man who has seen weather. The knife returns to its itinerary, talk returns to its path. You allow yourself a smile that does not need witnesses. The hall feels smaller in the useful way. Rafters lower, corners nearer, strangers less so. Laughter here does not instruct, persuade, or cure. It oils the hinges of hours that might otherwise squeal. By the time it ebbs, nothing has changed and everything sits more comfortably on its stool. Bread breaks more neatly, wine lifts more willingly, even candles seem steadier, as if laughter had advised their posture. The feathered display continues its solemn labour of being both bird and emblem. The room, less solemn now, keeps faith with symbol and supper alike. You rest your forearms on the oak and feel the patient grain beneath your sleeves. A last ripple travels the benches, taps a pewter rim, and dissolves into talk the colour of warm water. What remains is not silence, but the useful quiet that says the feast is ready to move on by an inch. You take another spoon of fruit and let it be what it is. The next laugh will come when called, and not sooner. The laughter drains into a softer murmur, leaving space for the steady burn of torches and candles. You notice how the air itself thickens with warmth, layers of heat drawn upward yet lingering low enough to touch your cheeks. The wax flames lean only slightly, as though drafts have given up their sport for the evening. Torches stand in iron brackets along the walls. Their cloth wrappings smoulder slowly, the flames fat and steady, shedding both light and smoke in measured shares. The smoke curls upward, grey ribbons that climb until the rafters claim them. There they hover, spreading and softening, blurring the beams into dark shapes. The hall becomes both sharper and hazier, edges of faces lit like brass, while corners dissolve into shade. Candles sit upon the tables in squat pewter holders. Some are tall, unburned until tonight, their wicks clean and firm. Others are shorter, already dripping, their wax running down in frozen rivulets that shine faintly like ivory stone. You watch one candle lean slightly in its pool of wax, its flame fluttering before righting itself again. The small drama goes unnoticed by most, but you note it, as though flame and patience were kin. You stretch your hands toward the nearest torch, feeling the air warm your palms without needing to touch. The heat lingers unevenly, one side of your hand hot, the other still cool, as though the torch reminds you that comfort is always partial. You turn your hands slowly, giving both sides their share. The smell of wax is faint, hidden under stronger scents of meat and spice. Yet it arrives when the flames are still, a gentle sweetness that mingles with the salt of sweat and the tang of smoke. It carries something homely, a memory of smaller chambers and single tapers, now multiplied 100-fold here. Guests shift slightly in their seats, not from discomfort, but from the slow heaviness that heat brings. Cloaks loosen, collars unfasten. A man wipes his brow with the corner of his sleeve, then lets his hand rest there as if claiming the coolness of linen. A woman lifts her goblet, the candlelight caught in its rim, the liquid inside deepening in colour as though wine itself were learning from fire. The torches hiss faintly when fat from the feast spitting in the hearth drifts too near. You hear the sound sharp, sudden, then gone as the flame swallows it and steadies itself again. Candle wax drips more slowly, the air so warm that each drop takes its time before surrendering to gravity. Pools form around the bases, hardened shells that mark the passing of hours without needing clock. Above, the rafters creak now and then, the old timbers swelling with the day's heat. A pigeon flutters once, disturbed by the shifting warmth, then settles again, cooing softly as though in sleepy complaint. The smoke continues to gather around it, a slow grey fog that softens the high darkness. You notice how light behaves differently on pewter, wood, and cloth. On pewter it clings sharply, a thin, bright edge. On oak it rests broad and golden, sinking into the grain. On wool and linen it scatters, more diffuse, leaving faces less defined but softer. The hall becomes a collection of pools and shadows, each candle and torch holding its small dominion. You lean back and breathe steadily. The air is heavy, yes, but not suffocating. It enfolds more than it presses. You taste a mixture of smoke, spice, and tallow when you breathe in, the flavours of feast carried not only on tongue, but on air itself. Your eyes drift toward one torch in particular. Its flame is long, bending at the tip, coloured yellow at its heart and orange where it exhales. It flickers without hurrying, drawing your attention into its small, repetitive dance. You feel your gaze soften, not watching but resting, until the torch becomes less a light and more a slow companion. The feast continues in its rhythm around you, but for a moment you exist only with the torches and candles, their heat on your face, their smoke in your lungs, their glow on your skin. The hall is warm, not just with fire but with presence. When the heat begins to weigh a little too much on shoulders and eyelids, the servants provide their own answer. From the side door they step quietly, carrying small paper cones folded neatly at the top, each filled with sugared almonds. They pass them down the benches without fanfare, placing one in front of each guest. The gesture is small, but the hall feels it as a turning of pace. The cones are rough grey paper, creased where fingers have folded them tight. A faint sweetness escapes through the paper seams, a perfume of sugar warmed by hand and air. You lift your own and feel the slight powdery dust already coating your fingertips. The cone is not heavy, no more than a handful, but its weight promises enough to balance the richness left by swan and sauce. You open the paper slowly. The almonds within are uneven, each coated in a thin crust of white sugar, some smooth, some rough, a few chipped to reveal the nut beneath. They look like small pebbles, pale stones plucked from a riverbed and polished by time. Their scent rises faintly, sugar sharp as frost, almond mild as bread. You take one between finger and thumb, roll it once to feel the grain of its surface, and place it on your tongue. The sugar cracks at first bite, a brittle snap that yields quickly to softness. Sweetness floods the mouth, plain but insistent, and then the nut emerges earthy, faintly bitter, a reminder that not all is decoration. The two together make a rhythm, sharp, sweet, then grounded, plain. You chew slowly and swallow, the aftertaste lighter than meat, cleaner than wine, a pause in the feast rather than another step forward. Around you the guests taste as you do. A woman tips her cone and pours a few into her palm, lining them up before choosing the smallest. A man cracks one and nods as though to say, yes, this is how balance feels. Across the hall, a boy crunches his too quickly, scattering sugar dust across his trencher, and the rushes below collect the grains without complaint. The hall quiets again, not into silence, but into softer conversation. The almonds demand no talk. They give the mouth something to do, something light, and let the ears rest. The sound is gentle, the crack of sugar between teeth, the faint clink of cones set on wood, the low hum of voices that no longer strain to carry. You take another, smaller this time. The sugar dissolves quicker, the almond asserts itself sooner. You bite half, leave half, then finish, letting the taste pass in smaller measure. You notice how your mouth feels clearer now, less heavy, as though the nut has swept away the last threads of fat and wine. The cones, though plain, look almost festive set along the table, pale against dark wood, their folded tops opening like petals. They remind you that not every symbol in a feast must be grand. Some are small, meant simply to reset the tongue, to let fullness rest without toppling into burden. A harp string is plucked softly, no tune, only a note, as though acknowledging the almond's work. The note hangs for a moment, then falls into the hush. Guests continue to eat, one almond, then another. Their faces calmer now, their hands slower. You set your cone aside with a few left inside. It is not necessary to finish. It is enough to have tasted, to have let sweetness break the weight. The paper rests light against the wood, a small folded gift that needs no ceremony. The hall breathes easier. The almonds have done their part, not to dazzle, not to impress, only to cleanse. You lean back slightly, feeling the warmth of torches, the softness of laughter lingering, the faint coolness of almond on your tongue. The feast holds steady, ready for whatever comes next. The almonds leave a faint sweetness on your tongue, just as the first of the pages steps forward with a flagon. He is slight and serious, hair smoothed too carefully, cuffs folded back by hands not yet certain of themselves. The flagon he bears is pewter, belly broad, neck narrow, its skin polished in ovals where many fingers have steadied it. He moves as if each pace were measured against a line no one else can see. At the high table, the cups are not pewter. They catch the light like late afternoon, gold, or at least gold-leafed, a mellow glow that softens the air around them. They are not ostentatious, no jeweled beasts or loud trumpets along the stems, only a warm skin of metal that lends the wine a colour deeper than its own. The steward has set them in a modest rank, the hosts, the nearest kinsmen's, the guest of consequence, and on down until pewter resumes its patient rule. You watch the page pause beside the first golden cup and tip the flagon just enough to begin the ribbon. The stream leaves the lip as a narrow thread, clear and obedient. It strikes the inner side of the cup rather than the middle, so it whispers rather than speaks. Then it gathers itself, turns darker, and settles with a small swirl. The page halts while the surface still moves, as if not to bruise the wine with more weight, until it has found its level. He rights the flagon, lifts it a finger, and moves on. Another page appears 2 tables below with a twin flagon, and another beyond him with a jug of ale for those who prefer grain to grape. They travel like geese in a loose line, never quite in step but aiming at the same season. Hands hover, mouths shape courteous refusals or wider welcomes. The movement is a rhythm learnt in kitchens and perfected in halls. Pour, listen, withdraw, pass. The boy at the high table keeps his left hand braced beneath the flagon's belly, his right guiding the neck. When he nears a cup that is less empty, he bends a fraction lower, letting the stream fall from shorter height so the sound remains modest. A single drop sweeps along the cup's rim and attempts escape. He turns the flagon in a small circle, draws the drop back into the herd, and sets the base straight again. No linen is needed. Pride settles where cloth might have. At your table, pewter finds pewter. The page's pour is the same care in a duller key, the same tilt, the same restraint, the same pause. He does not fill to the lip. No one here expects the indignity of a spill, and full cups argue with elbows. He leaves a finger breadth of mercy and a little air for the wine to breathe its small sermon. You nod without words, and he answers by tipping a hair longer than you asked. It is a language of very small favours, Further down, another boy with ale reaches a man whose empty cup has been turned mouth down for a rest. He notes it, bows the jug slightly, and retreats a step, reading the sign without comment. A moment later, the same cup is turned upright. The boy returns as if summoned by thought. The jug tilts. A pale froth climbs. He arrests it at the height that appeals to both thirst and caution. The man drinks before the head fades and sets his cup down with a satisfied breath that passes for praise. The golden cups glow brighter when the wine reaches them. Even watered for the course of a long day, the red deepens to something like amber when it stands in gold, and to something like garnet when it lies in pewter. The difference is not better or worse, only two kinds of evening. You find yourself watching the metal almost as much as the liquid. How light rides the rim, how a thin arc of brightness runs along the inside curve and breaks when the cup is lifted. Spills, when they are born, are brief and without spectacle. A drop leaps, another follows, then both are captured by a folded cloth that appears from a sleeve as if sleeves were made for this magic. The steward's eye rises and falls like a slow-winged hawk. The pages perform as trees would in wind, bowing, returning, without the vanity of seeming to notice they are seen. Here and there a hand waits over long, the guest measuring whether another mouthful would improve the story he is not yet telling. The page knows this pause as a kind of question. He lets the flagon rest against his palm, and gives the guest's patience time to ripen into consent or retreat. When the nod arrives, he answers with a paw that forgives the doubt and does not mention it again. You lift your cup and test its warmth with your lip before you taste. The wine has been tempered again at the hearth, no longer steaming as before, but friendly, as if a cloak had been given to it for the walk from kitchen to hall. Nutmeg steps forward and bows. Cinnamon answers. Clove keeps its counsel. You drink with the measure the table approves. Not to whet a silence, not to cover a sentence, simply to keep company with the hour. Across from you, a woman with careful fingers shows how one steadies a cup when a page pours thumb and forefinger at the stem, other fingers under the bowl in a cradle that neither grips nor abandons. Her method means the stream meets a firm surface rather than a wandering target. The page notes the courtesy and gives a paw as neat as a tailor's seam. Down the benches, talk lifts a little whenever gold appears, not to flatter, but to witness. A guest remarks softly, almost to himself, how wine taken from guilt seems sweeter, though he admits the tongue may be tempted by brightness. Another answers that pewter keeps the wine honest, gold tells it a pleasant lie. Both men drink and seem content with two equal truths. You notice the arms of the pages by the time they reach the lower end of the hall, not trembling, but carrying a small fatigue like a weight under the skin. A flagon that seemed devoted to you alone has a life that includes 70 other mouths. Yet the boys keep their quiet ceremony, the tilt, the pause, the set, the step. A single moment of clatter would be a stone in a pond. Instead, the surface remains smooth. At the high board, a cup is raised for a brief toast you cannot hear. Heads incline. The page waits until the cup returns to its ring of light on linen, then completes his work with a paw that respects both speech and silence. The steward's keys make a small sound as he shifts metal on metal, satisfied, then goes still again. By the time the pages turn back through the door to refill their flagons, the hall's cups hold a sort of even weather, not empty enough to accuse, not full enough to threaten a stain. Your own sits in the circle your hand has warmed into the oak. You touch the stem, and the cup turns a fraction, catching a new angle of candle. The pages return with flagons heavy again, and the round resumes as if the first had been rehearsal. A different boy serves your end now, shorter, careful, the lip of his flagon nicked where metal met stone long ago. He finds your cup without requiring you to plead. The stream lands exactly where its elder placed it earlier, and the wine gathers into itself with grateful quiet. You drink, and the cup gives back warmth. You set it down, and the ring of light around its base trembles, then holds. The pages drift on, leaving behind a corridor of small satisfactions. Cups that think better of themselves, hands that loosen a degree, talk that learns an easier gait. Golden goblets glow at the head. Pewter keeps counsel along the length, and you observe the whole procession as one observes a tide, no single wave remarkable, altogether inevitable. The flagons diminish, the boys vanish briefly and return. The hall keeps its pulse without needing reminder. You feel the measured comfort of a task done properly in a world that often prefers the other kind. Pour, listen, withdraw, pass. Pour, listen, withdraw, pass. Your cup stands ready, neither proud nor abashed, waiting for the next small weather to arrive. The hall seems to breathe with a slower rhythm once the flagons have been set aside. The rush of pouring, the muted shuffle of boys with serious faces, has passed for a time. In their place rises the quiet business of carving. The swans, that strange centerpiece of the banquet, have at last made their way onto the great boards of oak, where knives now wait. They rest there like pale ships in calm water, their long necks arched forward, wings folded in feigned sleep, though their meat is roasted dark beneath the outer dressing. You watch the carvers take their places, 2 men at the high board, each with a blade, long as an arm and sharp as caution. Their knives are not for boasting but for use, the edges so thin they disappear in certain light. One man steadies the swan with a fork of iron, the other begins the first cut down the breast, drawing slow and steady as if unwilling to alarm the bird, though it has long since given up any resistance. The sound is not unpleasant. Knife on bone has its own kind of music, a faint crackle, a soft tearing, an occasional knock when steel greets rib. The meat parts in smooth sheets, steaming still, though the air of the hall cools it quickly. A scent richer than the earlier courses drifts down the benches, a mingling of roasted fowl, faint traces of cinnamon used in the stuffing, a layer of buttery glaze brushed on the skin to make it shine beneath the candles. Pages hover nearby with platters lined in pewter. As each slice is freed, it is laid out in order, not scattered, so that when the plate travels the table, the pattern seems deliberate. The first portions go to the high table, of course, the host's kin, the noble guests whose names would sit well on a list. The rest of the hall waits, and no one calls impatience. The carving is as much part of the feast as the eating. The men work methodically. One detaches a wing joint, turning the bird slightly to free it with his blade. He sets it aside whole, the shape still intact, as if it were waiting to take flight. Another man begins with the thighs, pressing the point down, sliding under, lifting with care so the skin stays neat. Each action is performed as if watched by more eyes than truly see an old custom of doing things not only for hunger, but for form. Closer to you, a lesser carver is at work on a goose, humbler in shape but easier under the knife. His strokes are less certain, the meat pulling unevenly in places. He presses his lips together as if to make up for the noise of tearing skin with silence of his own. Still, the guests at his end of the table take what comes, some laughing at the uneven slices, others glad enough that the weight is shorter here. The swan meat, once carved, is not merely dropped onto trenchers. It is served with gravies that shimmer faintly, spiced with pepper, thickened with bread or almond paste. A ladle makes its circle, and each plate receives a portion generous enough to speak of plenty, but not so lavish that waste will shame the steward. The sauce pools against the carved flesh and runs a little when the plate tilts, leaving streaks on pewter like brushstrokes on slate. When your portion arrives, you see the skin glisten in its last hint of glaze. The meat beneath is darker than goose, firmer than chicken, carrying with it the faint perfume of the herbs stuffed inside. Sage, parsley, and a hint of sweet marjoram. You break it with your knife and feel the fibers part. Steam curls upward for a moment and is gone. You place a piece on your tongue, and it tells you what richness means in a hall that does not eat such things every week. Along the benches, you notice the different ways people receive their portion. Some eat slowly, savouring each bite as if not to lose it too quickly. Others cut with eagerness, talking less, chewing more, as though appetite is their most loyal guest. At the high table, etiquette holds stronger reign. Each bite is taken with measured pace, each gesture considered, so that the bird seems less a meal and more a performance shared by all. The carvers keep at their work, As one swan diminishes, another is brought forward, laid upon the block with its head bent low, its beak lacquered by the fire into something like polished horn. The knives begin again, their sound weaving in and out of the murmur of voices. The hall grows louder, then softer, as talk rises with wine and falls with chewing. From time to time a small silence gathers when a platter pauses, or when a joint proves stubborn under the blade. The pause stretches, then ends with a satisfying crack as the knife finds its path. A ripple of relief passes through the nearest benches, though no one says it outright. You sip your wine, letting its warmth wash down the richness of the meat, and lean back slightly, satisfied with the measure of the moment. The ritual of carving seems endless, but it is steady, like the toll of a distant bell. One bird follows another, each yielding its portion, each finding its way into pewter plates, wooden trenchers, and waiting mouths. The hall settles into this rhythm, as if nothing else were expected of the night. You realize that in this quiet ceremony, the feast is not only about filling the belly, but about showing the world that the host commands both order and abundance. And so you sit, knife in hand, plate before you, watching as swans are carved into silence, their wings and thighs laid bare, their breasts parted with deliberate grace. Each piece finds its place, each guest receives their measure, and the hall breathes out in contentment, one careful slice at a time. The feast settles into its long rhythm. You sit back and watch as the energy of the room changes. What was once sharp and excited now moves like a slow tide. At first you remember the sudden cheer when the birds were brought in, feathers carefully arranged, heads crowned, a whole spectacle of power and fertility laid before hungry eyes. But that moment has passed. The dishes now rest on the tables in softened heaps, their glamour reduced to familiar meat. The sound of knives no longer rises in bursts. Instead, it scrapes and hums steadily across pewter plates. Each cut feels more deliberate, less hurried. Guests who once lunged for a favoured piece now lean back, chewing carefully, pausing often to drink or to speak. You hear the benches creak as bodies shift, weighed down by food. The hall feels quieter, though voices remain. It is not silence, but a slower current of sound. The swan tastes the same with each bite, and that sameness is its weight. The herbs that brightened the first mouthfuls now fade into something steady, heavy, without surprise. Your mouth tires slightly from chewing, and yet you continue because that is what one does at a banquet. Eat, drink, remain part of the collective act. You do not hurry, you do not stop. The trenchers beneath the meat, thick slabs of bread, sag under the juices. You see some guests break off soaked corners to taste the rich crumbs. Others ignore them, knowing they will be gathered later, carried to the kitchen, and passed along to those who never sat in the hall. It is strange to think how the feast continues elsewhere, long after you leave the table, in the mouths of servants, beggars, and those who take what lingers. Candles burn lower, wax streams down their sides, pooling at the base of iron holders. The light grows softer, filling the hall with flickering shapes. On the walls, tapestries ripple faintly, shadows sliding over images of saints and hunts. It makes the cloth seem alive, though you know it is only the flame playing tricks. You notice how people's gestures change. At the start, hands were wide, reaching, demanding. Now, they are slower, almost graceful, as though fullness teaches courtesy. One man places a piece of meat back on his plate before lifting it again. Another wipes his fingers on a cloth with unnecessary care. The feast has entered its heavy middle stage. The air smells different too. Early it was all roasted meat, spiced steam, and the sharp tang of sauce. Now it is the mingled breath of many diners, wine spilled here and there, grease cooling on pewter. It is not unpleasant, just thicker, slower, heavier. Across the room a boy passes with a basket of bread, though few take more. Another boy pours wine into cups already half full. Service continues whether or not appetite lingers. You realize this is the way of feasts. The supply must never falter, even when the hunger does. You glance at the swan bones on the carving board. Once whole and strange, the bird is now nothing more than pale fragments, scattered and picked clean. Another swan follows, then another, each carved in the same rhythm, each losing its shape, until they all look alike mere remains, fading into the greater blur of the meal. And still the guests eat. The hall is no longer a theatre, it is a stomach stretched and working, unhurried. You feel yourself part of that slow machinery. Chewing, sipping, pausing, repeating. You lean back, your body heavier, your mind softened by wine. The taste of swan fades slowly from your tongue, though it lingers at the edges of memory, as though it wishes to remind you where you are, what you are meant to be doing. Simply staying, simply eating, simply being full with the others in the hall. You shift slightly on the bench, and the wood sighs beneath your weight. Around you, others do the same, creating a faint chorus of creaks, as if the furniture itself shares in the fullness of the evening. The long tables still hold their burdens, though the abundance has begun to look tired. Piles of bread grow staler by the minute, meats lose their sheen, sauces thicken and crust at the edges. What was once an extravagant display now seems more like evidence of excess, resting uneasily under candlelight. Your eyes wander to the center of the hall, where the servers move with mechanical rhythm. They carry platters, replace trenchers, pour wine without pause. Their motions are so practiced they seem almost invisible, absorbed into the background of the feast, and yet, without them, nothing would continue. They maintain the illusion of endlessness, making certain no guest ever sits with an empty plate or cup. The talk drifts into softer tones. Earlier, the laughter rang sharp, each voice raised to be heard above the rest. Now, people speak close, leaning across tables or turning their heads just enough to be heard by neighbors. You hear fragments of praise for the cook, murmured observations on the flavor of swan, quiet comparisons to other feasts. No one seems in a hurry to say anything profound. The words serve mainly to fill the air, like a background hum that reassures you the night is still alive. The wine darkens your senses a little. Its taste has grown familiar, like the meat itself no longer a novelty, just a steady companion. The pewter cup feels cool in your hand, though the liquid within has lost the chill it once carried from the cellar. When you drink, the warmth is more imagined than real. Still, it is enough. The swan meat now rests in thick slices on your plate, its outer skin glazed in herbs, its inside pale, fibrous, and faintly sweet. You cut it without much thought, the knife sinking through easily. Each bite blends with the last, forming one long, unbroken taste that clings to the back of your mouth. You wonder briefly if it is meant to symbolize something larger: life, fertility, continuity, but the thought dissolves as quickly as it comes. You are too full to think much beyond the next bite. Servants carry away bones and replace them with fresh cuts from birds that had been waiting. The cycle feels endless. One swan becomes another, and then another, until you can no longer recall which bird began the meal and which bird now rests on your plate. They blur together in memory and in taste, all belonging to the same ritual of fullness. The hall itself seems swollen, as though the stone walls have absorbed the weight of the food and wine. The rushes on the floor smell stronger now, trampled underfoot and warmed by the heat of bodies. Candles tremble in their holders, spilling wax that hardens into pale ridges, like frozen streams running down black iron. Shadows sway across the ceiling beams, moving slowly, endlessly repeating. You notice a lady near the dais lower her head into her hand for a moment, her elbow propped on the table. She does not close her eyes, but she rests them, heavy with wine and food. A man beside her speaks without pause, perhaps not even aware that she listens only halfway. Others nearby nod absently, their minds softened, their attention wandering. It is the kind of lull that feasts always reach, when fullness replaces conversation and the body dictates silence. Your own body urges the same. You shift again, easing your back, stretching your legs slightly under the bench. The motion does little, yet it feels necessary, as though reminding yourself that you can still move. The act of eating, once lively, has slowed to a gentle repetition, a steady rhythm that no longer excites but soothes. The swan lies before you, less a delicacy now than an obligation. You eat it not for hunger, but because it is there, because the feast demands presence, because the night stretches on and you stretch with it. Bite by bite, sip by sip, you let yourself drift into the slow current of the hall. The sounds around you merge into one long tone, chewing, murmuring, the scrape of pewter, the shuffle of feet, the faint hiss of candle flame. Nothing rises above the rest. It all blends into a kind of drowsy harmony. You breathe it in, and it fills you as surely as the food has filled your belly. You place your knife down for a while and simply sit, your hand resting on the table, your eyes watching the soft, constant movement of the hall. The swan waits, the wine waits, the night waits. You are not required to do anything more than remain. And so you remain quietly, steadily, like the others, part of a banquet that feels endless because it moves so slowly, never rushing, never hurrying toward its conclusion. The hall feels as though it exhales around you. What once was lively and sharp now softens into a steady murmur, a background hum of full voices and tired movements. The rushes beneath your feet give off a faint smell of crushed greenery, mixed with the heaviness of spilled drink. You sit quietly in the long stretch of wood that is your bench, aware of the weight of your own body pressed down, your hands resting on the table where crumbs and droplets have gathered like small reminders of the feast. Before you lies a plate still scattered with pieces of swan. The slices grow cooler by the moment, pale beneath the wavering light of the candles. You chew another slowly, not for hunger, but because the action keeps you tethered. Each bite has softened in taste, familiar now, less sharp than before. You feel no urgency, only the rhythm of lifting food to your mouth, chewing, swallowing, setting the knife down, and repeating. It becomes a lull of movement, almost as if the food eats itself through your hands. The candles in their stands lean slightly, their wax running down in uneven rivulets. Some drips harden into pale towers, others spill into little pools at the base. The light they give flickers unevenly, making shadows stretch across the long table and across the faces of those seated nearby. When a head leans forward, its shadow looms larger, merging with others, until the wall behind seems alive with slow, wavering shapes. You watch them without urgency, letting your eyes blur their outlines until they are only gentle motions. The talk among the guests has dimmed. Where earlier there had been laughter and rising voices, there are now half-finished sentences and nods of agreement. The words themselves seem less important than the act of sound. The filling of silence with something low and steady. You hear it the way you hear a breeze moving through tall grass, without meaning, without sharpness, simply existing. At your side, a servant moves quietly, gathering empty pitchers. The metal clinks faintly as he lifts one, tips it, finds it dry, and carries it away. His steps are soft, careful against the rushes. He looks neither hurried nor idle, only steady, as though this motion has been rehearsed countless times before. You watch him cross the hall until he disappears through a side door, leaving only the sound of his departure. The air itself has grown heavy. The mingling of roasted swan, spilled wine, and human presence lingers in every breath. It is not unpleasant, though it clings. You inhale and feel the thickness of the night settle deeper inside you. The hall seems wrapped in its own atmosphere, closed from the world beyond. Whatever lies outside the cool air, the dark fields feels far away, unreachable. Only here exists, only this heaviness, only this glow. Your cup sits before you, no longer full. The pewter carries the faint warmth of your hand, the faint chill of the wine. You lift it slowly, sip, and set it back down, the motion small but grounding. Around you, others do the same, some out of habit, some absent-mindedly. The pattern repeats across the table like a quiet wave, each movement echoing another. You look again at the swan's remains. The carved slices grow fewer. The skin, once golden, now dulls in the flicker of light. You touch the edge of your knife against it, cutting without thought, as though your hand continues the task because stopping feels stranger than carrying on. The taste that follows is no different from the last, yet you let it fill your mouth once more. The same, the same, the same. Above, the rafters vanish into shadow. The smoke from the candles drifts upward, curling slowly, caught in unseen drafts. It moves in ways you cannot predict, yet always soft, always steady, always vanishing into the dark. You watch until your gaze grows heavy, your lids lowering halfway. The movement of smoke becomes like thought itself, present, fading, present, fading. You sit in the middle of it all, neither apart nor central, one of many bodies leaning into the same rhythm of the banquet. Full, tired, slowed. You breathe in, you breathe out, you remain. The feast has reached the point where even the servants grow slower. Platters arrive less often, and when they do, fewer hands reach for them. The swan has been eaten almost to its bones, its once proud form reduced to fragments. Still, a few morsels remain on the edge of plates, untouched but not removed. They sit as reminders of abundance, though no one desires them now. You notice how the hall sounds different. It is not quiet, yet no sound stands out. The scrape of knives, the low hum of words, the shifting of wooden benches, all blend into a single tone. It surrounds you gently, steady, and unbroken, as though the hall itself breathes. You lean into it, feeling its rhythm match your own body's slowing pace. The candlelight has mellowed. Some candles burn lower, their flames trembling weakly. Others continue tall, but all of them flicker together, casting the same soft glow. The light blurs at the edges of your vision, as though it too grows drowsy. You blink slowly, and the room seems wrapped in a golden haze. The swan bones at the center of the table glisten faintly. Stripped of most of their flesh, they hold little interest now. Yet their presence feels heavy, symbolic, as if they watch over the guests who once devoured them. You study their pale curves, their angles, and find them strangely calming, like driftwood washed smooth by water. The guests nearby lean back more often than they lean forward. Their voices rise and fall in uneven waves, some pausing in mid-thought, some ending without conclusion. A laugh breaks out faintly, then dies as quickly as it began. It feels less like joy and more like a habit of release. You listen, not for meaning, but for the comfort of the sound itself. Your own hands rest now on the table. Fingers spread slightly, palms against the worn wood. You trace the surface idly, feeling its grooves, the places where the grain shows, the spots worn smooth by years of use. Each ridge feels cool, grounding, reminding you of where you sit, here, now, in this long hall of slow-moving time. The pewter cup before you is nearly empty. You lift it one last time, sip what remains, and let the dryness linger in your mouth. The act feels final, though you know more wine could be poured if asked. Still, you set the cup down gently, leaving it there as though the moment has closed. A servant passes again, this time carrying a small tray of sweetmeats. You see sugared almonds, candied fruits, bits of marchpane shaped into small forms. They glisten faintly in the candlelight, their sweetness promising more than you desire. A guest beside you takes one, bites carefully, and chews with the faintest smile. You decline without words, content with what you already hold inside you. Your body feels heavier now. Each shift on the bench seems slower, as though you carry the weight of the hall itself. You breathe deeply, and the air fills you with its mixture of warmth, smoke, and faint sweetness. It rests in your chest, steady without rush. You look once more at the table. The feast continues, though gently, as if it winds itself down. No one declares its end, yet you sense the nearness of stillness. Each gesture, each bite, each word feels like a step toward quiet. You allow yourself to sink into it, the slow unwinding of a night that has nowhere else to go. The hour has deepened. You can feel it in the way the hall breathes slower, softer, less insistent. The banqueting table stretches before you, still laden with remnants, though much of its sharpness has dulled. Bones remain where meat once gleamed. Pools of wax rest where flames had been stronger. Plates stand scattered, half filled yet untouched. You lift your gaze across the room. The nobleman who presided at the head of the table leans back, his posture eased. His cup rests idly in his hand, but he does not drink. His gaze drifts, perhaps watching the hall as you do, perhaps only lost in thought. Around him, others mirror this weariness. Their heads incline lower, their voices soften. No one commands, no one urges. The hall itself commands, and it commands stillness. You place both hands on your lap, letting your knife rest at last upon the plate. Its edge glistens faintly with fat, but you no longer feel the need to clean it. It lies there as though asleep, as though it too has reached its end. The silence of metal feels strangely fitting, a pause that completes the night. The candles burn low. Some sputter, their flames bending as though bowing. A few extinguish quietly, leaving small trails of smoke that curl into the rafters. The remaining flames hold steady, dimmer now, casting shadows that sway but do not surprise. You watch the smoke rise until it fades, vanishing into the upper dark. The guests lean into each other more closely now. Their words are fewer, their tones softer, as though spoken more for nearness than for meaning. You hear phrases end without answers, sighs follow without words. It feels less like conversation and more like drifting thought. You listen not to understand but to be carried, the sound washing gently over you. The hall grows warmer. The air sits close, pressing lightly against your skin. The mixture of food, drink, wax, and bodies has thickened into a kind of cloak, heavy but familiar. You draw it around you without protest, letting it settle as though it belongs. Each breath you take carries the weight of the hall, and yet you accept it calmly. The swan bones at the table's center remain like markers of the night. Their pale arcs gleam faintly, relics of abundance, remnants of ritual. You stare at them without judgment, without thought, simply letting them be. They remind you that all feasts end in bones, all fullness ends in quiet, and all noise ends in stillness. You blink more slowly now. The candlelight softens each time your eyes close, opening to reveal the same glow, the same haze, the same shapes of weary figures leaning in shadow. It repeats without change, a rhythm you no longer question. You are part of it, and it is part of you. You sit still, breathing gently, waiting for nothing more than the night to carry itself forward. The end of the feast arrives without announcement. There is no signal, no final call. Instead, it comes as the natural dimming of motion, the settling of sound, the soft withdrawal of appetite. The hall does not empty, it simply exhales, releasing its hold on you slowly, without rush. You feel it in the silence first. Where voices once mingled, there is now only the occasional murmur, the brief scrape of a bench, the faint sigh of someone leaning back. The noise has thinned until it is more absence than presence. It spreads like a tide withdrawing, leaving behind stillness that shines faintly in the candlelight. You look to the table. The swan is gone, its flesh devoured, its bones stripped and pale. Platters lie scattered, their edges smeared, their centers nearly bare. Cups stand emptied or half-filled, their surfaces dull now. What remains is not abundance but the echo of it. And yet, it feels enough. More than enough. As though the feast has fulfilled its purpose simply by existing. Your hands fold loosely upon your lap. The knife rests where you left it. The cup sits untouched. You make no move to lift them again. Instead, you allow them to remain still and quiet, as though part of the hall itself. They no longer belong to you, but to the evening. The candles burn low, their flames weak but steady. Some are nearly spent, their wax pooled thick around their bases. Their glow softens, fading into a haze that blurs the outlines of faces, of walls, of time itself. You stare into the light and feel your eyes grow heavy, your breath slow. The flames seem to breathe with you, flickering as you inhale, steadying as you exhale. The nobleman at the head of the table does not rise. He sits with his eyes lowered, his cup forgotten in his hand. Others mirror him, their movements hushed, their bodies settled. It is a hall of stillness now, filled not with feasting but with waiting. Waiting for nothing in particular, only for the night to pass, for the candles to fade, for the quiet to grow. You lean back slightly, your body heavy, your mind softer still. The air holds you as gently as a cloak, thick yet calming. You breathe it in one last time, feeling the mixture of smoke, wax, and warmth fill you slowly. Each breath carries you deeper into stillness. The hall remains, the night remains, the soft glow remains. You sit within it, quiet, without need of more. The feast has ended, but you remain part of its lingering calm. The banquet is finished, yet it does not end sharply. It ends the way embers die in the hearth, not with a sudden dark, but with a long, patient glow that lingers. You sit in the after-quiet, the table before you no longer alive with motion, but stilled, softened, folded into memory. The swan, once golden, is now only bone. The platters are smeared, the cups dulled, yet none of this feels like loss. It feels complete the way the tide feels complete when it pulls away, leaving a shore that is both empty and fulfilled. You look at the remains without hunger, without regret. They are not food now, but markers proof that there was once warmth, once laughter, once plenty. The candles burn down to their ends. Some are no more than stubs, their flames trembling but steady. Wax pools thick at their bases, hardened into small monuments of the evening. Their glow spreads softly, no longer casting sharp shadows, only blurring the edges of everything it touches. The hall itself seems wrapped in this haze, its stones and rafters melting into one calm breath. Voices are nearly gone. Only the occasional murmur drifts through the air, a phrase left unfinished, a sigh, the faint scrape of a bench leg against the rushes. The sound no longer belongs to people, but to the hall itself, its natural breathing as it returns to stillness. You fold your hands and sit back, letting the heaviness of food, drink, and time settle over you. It presses not as burden, but as a blanket. Your body grows slower, your thoughts softer, your breathing deeper. You feel yourself sink into the rhythm of the night, into the steady tide of silence. The nobleman does not rise, nor do you. There is no reason to move. The hall holds you in its quiet embrace, as it holds everyone, each guest wrapped in the same slowness. The feast has ended not in noise, not in cheer, but in a shared hush that feels both intimate and infinite. You close your eyes for a moment, and the hall does not vanish. It stays with you in the glow behind your lids, in the warmth in your chest, in the faint taste of swan and wine still lingering. It stays the way a dream stays, soft and unfinished, but complete enough. You breathe once more, deeply, slowly. The night exhales with you, and the hall, wrapped in its low light and long silence, becomes nothing more than a memory settling gently into sleep. We hope this glimpse into old customs has been a calm and pleasant one. If it made you curious for more, you can like, share, or leave a kind comment. And if you wish, subscribe to be here for the next unhurried tradition we explore together. End of script. Sweet dreams.